In the fog-choked streets of Victorian London, a circus ringmaster vanishes mid-performance, leaving only a cryptic note and whispers of a curse. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson plunge into a world of dazzling illusions and dark secrets, uncovering a sinister plot of blackmail, smuggling, and a shadowy mastermind. From a mirrored cabinet to a lion's roar in the night, every clue leads closer to a deadly showdown. Will Holmes unravel the mystery before the circus falls to terror? The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The mysterious summons. The fog clung to the cobblestones of Baker Street like a spectral shroud, muffling the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the distant cries of newsboys hawking the evening editions. It was a damp, chilly evening in the autumn of 1891, and I, Dr. John H. Watson, found myself once again seated in the familiar confines of 2-1B, the air thick with the scent of pipe tobacco and the faint crackle of a fire in the grate. Sherlock Holmes, my friend and companion in countless adventures, lounged in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his sharp grey eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the walls of our sitting room. The day had been uneventful, a rarity in our shared existence, and I had spent the better part of it tending to my medical practice while Holmes, in one of his mercurial moods, had alternated between desultory violin practice and the silent contemplation that often preceded his most brilliant deductions. I was engrossed in a medical journal, its pages filled with the latest theories on infectious diseases, when a sharp rap at the door shattered the quiet. Mrs. Hudson with a visitor, no doubt, Holmes murmured without stirring, his voice carrying that peculiar blend of ennui and anticipation that signaled his interest in the unexpected. The door swung open, and our landlady appeared, her face etched with the mild exasperation that often accompanied her dealings with Holmes. "A young lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, her tone suggesting she was not entirely pleased with the interruption. "She insists it's urgent, though she won't give her name. Says it's a matter of life and death." Holmes's eyes gleamed, and he sat up, the lethargy of moments before vanishing like smoke. "Show her in, Mrs. Hudson, and let us dispense with formalities." A moment later, a figure stepped into the room, and I found myself staring at one of the most striking women I had ever seen. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with a lithe, graceful frame that suggested both strength and agility. Her dark hair was swept up beneath a simple bonnet, and her eyes, a vivid green, were wide with a mixture of fear and determination. She wore a practical yet elegant travelling cloak, its hem faintly dusted with the mud of London's streets, and her gloved hands clutched a small envelope, which she held as if it were a talisman against some unseen terror. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked, her voice clear but tinged with a faint accent French, I thought, though softened by years in England. "I am he," Holmes replied, rising with a courtesy that belied his earlier languor. "And this is my friend and colleague, Dr. John Watson. Pray, take a seat, Miss Duval," she said, hesitating only a moment before sinking into the chair opposite Holmes. "Anna Duval. I am a performer with Duval's travelling circus, currently encamped on the outskirts of London. I have come to you because I have nowhere else to turn." Holmes leaned forward, his interest fully engaged. "A circus performer," he said, his voice system, tone softening with a hint of curiosity. "And what brings you here in such distress, Miss Duval?" She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the envelope. "It is Maestro Vellucci, our ringmaster. He had vanished. Mr. Holmes disappeared in the middle of a performance, before the eyes of 1,000 spectators, and there is something unnatural about it, something terrible. Holmes's eyebrows rose slightly, a rare sign of genuine intrigue. A disappearance during the performance. That is unusual, even for a circus. Pray, tell me everything, from the beginning, omit no detail, however trivial it may seem. Miss Duval nodded, her composure fraying slightly as she began her tale. The circus, she explained, had arrived in London a fortnight ago, setting up its grand tent in a field near Blackheath. Maestro Enrico Begiusi, the charismatic and commanding ringmaster, was the heart of the troupe, a man of boundless energy and theatrical flair. His performances were the highlight of every show, blending daring feats with a magnetic presence that captivated audiences. On the night in question, 3 days prior, Vellucci had been performing a new actor spectacular illusion, involving a mirrored cabinet from which he was to emerge in a puff of smoke. The cabinet, she described, was a marvel of stagecraft, its panels adorned with intricate carvings and reflective glass that dazzled under the gaslights. He stepped into the cabinet. As he had done in rehearsals, she said, her voice trembling. The doors closed, the smoke rose, and the drums rolled. But when the doors opened, he was gone. Not a trace of him remained. At first, we thought it was part of the act, but he never reappeared. The audience grew restless, and we had to end the show early. Since then, there have been strange occurrences, lights flickering in the tents, whispers in the dark, objects moving on their own. The troupe is terrified, Mr. Holmes. They speak of a curse, of something evil stalking us. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly racing through the possibilities. A curse, you say? Superstition is the refuge of the fearful mind, Miss Duval. Let us focus on the facts. Describe the cabinet in detail, if you please. She hesitated, as if picturing the scene. It is tall, perhaps 7 feet, with a wooden frame and mirrored panels. The interior is lined with velvet, and there is a mechanism, a platform, I believe, that allows for dramatic entrances and exits. Maestro Vellucci designed it himself, with the help of our stage engineer, Mr. Hargrove. It was meant to be the centerpiece of our new season. And this Hargrove, Holmes interjected, did he inspect the cabinet after the disappearance? Yes, sir, she replied. He found nothing amiss. The platform was in place, the mirrors intact. There was no sign of anything. Holmes leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. And the scene itself, the stage, the audience, the other performers, what did you observe? Miss Duval's brow furrowed. It was chaos after he failed to appear. The audience thought it a jest at first, but when the minutes stretched on, they began to jeer. The other performers, myself included, tried to maintain order, but the crowd grew unruly. I noticed a strange smell, like chemicals, near the cabinet, but I thought it was part of the smoke effect. And there was a flicker of light, like a lantern, in the shadows near the back of the tent, but I could not see who held it. A chemical smell, Holmes repeated, his tone sharpening. Describe it precisely. It was sharp, acrid, like ammonia, perhaps, but fainter. I am no chemist, Mr. Holmes, but it was not the usual scent of the smoke machines. Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and I knew he was already forming a hypothesis. And Vellucci himself, he continued. What sort of man was he? Had he enemies, debts, secrets? Miss Duval's face clouded. Maestro Vellucci is a man of great passion. He built the circus from nothing, traveling across Europe to gather the finest acts. He is generous but demanding, with a temper that could flare when things went wrong. As for enemies, I cannot say for certain, but there were rumors. Some said he had crossed paths with dangerous men in his travels, men who do not forgive easily, and there was talk of debts, though he always dismissed such gossip with a laugh. Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "And this envelope you clutch so tightly, what does it contain?" She started, as if she had forgotten the envelope in her hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it and withdrew a single sheet of paper, which she handed to Holmes. I leaned closer to see it. The note was written in a bold, slanted hand, the ink black and slightly smudged. "The ringmaster's time is done. The shadows claim their due. Leave London, or the circus will fall." Holmes held the note to the light, examining it closely. Written on cheap paper, likely purchased at a common stationer's. The ink is fresh, and the handwriting suggests a man of education but haste. No signature, no seal. Posted or delivered? "Delivered," Miss Duval said. "It was found in Maestro Vellusi's tent this morning, pinned to his costume with a dagger." "A dagger," I exclaimed, unable to contain my shock. "This is no mere prank, Holmes." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice calm but edged with intensity. "This is a calculated threat, designed to inspire fear. The question is whether it is a warning or a boast." Miss Duval, who else knew of this note? "Only Marco, our lead acrobat, and Pippin, the clown," she said. "They were with me when I found it. I swore them to secrecy, for fear of further panic among the troupe." "Wise," Holmes said approvingly. "Panic is the ally of chaos, and chaos is our enemy's friend. Now, tell me of the circus's movements. Where had you performed before London?" "We toured the continent for the past year," she said. "Paris, Vienna, Berlin, and smaller towns along the way. We arrived in England 2 months ago, performing in Brighton and Bath before coming to London. Maestro Vellucci was particularly excited about London, saying it would be our greatest triumph." "And did anything unusual occur in these other cities?" Holmes pressed. She frowned, thinking there were incidents. "In Paris, a fire broke out in one of the supply tents, but it was blamed on a careless worker. In Vienna, some of our props were stolen, though they were later found abandoned. And in Berlin, Maestro Vellucci received a letter similar to this one. Now that I think of it, though I did not see its contents." He laughed it off, but he was shaken. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "A pattern emerges, Watson. Our adversary is persistent, following the circus across borders. This is no petty grudge, but a campaign of terror. Miss Duval, I will need to see the circus grounds, the cabinet, and every inch of Velluci's quarters. We shall accompany you." "At once, now?" she asked, startled. "But it is late, and the roads are treacherous in this fog." "Time is the enemy of truth," Holmes said, already reaching for his coat. "Watson, fetch your revolver. I suspect we are dealing with more than a theatrical trickster." I hastened to comply, my heart quickening at the prospect of a new adventure. Miss Duval rose, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," she said softly. "I pray you can help us." Holmes gave her a curt nod, his mind already elsewhere. "We shall see, Miss Duval, we shall see." The journey to Blackheath was a slow one, the fog rendering the streets a ghostly maze. We took a hansom cab, the driver grumbling about the weather, but spurred on by Holmes's promise of an extra shilling. Miss Duval sat opposite us, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting to the shrouded windows as if expecting some phantom to emerge from the mist. Holmes, for his part, was silent, his sharp profile illuminated by the occasional glow of a passing street lamp. I knew that his mind was a whirlwind of calculations, piecing together the fragments of Miss Duval's story. The circus grounds appeared like a dreamscape through the fog, the great tent looming like a cathedral of canvas and rope. Lanterns cast a dim flickering light, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of sawdust and the faint musk of animals. The troupe was in disarray, performers milling about in various states of costume and distress. A juggler dropped his pins at the sight of us, and a pair of clowns whispered nervously as we passed. Miss Duval led us to the main tent, where the mirrored cabinet stood center stage, its polished surfaces gleaming under the gaslights. It was, as she described, a towering structure of wood and glass, its carvings depicting mythical beasts and celestial motifs. Holmes circled it like a predator, his eyes scanning every inch. He tapped the mirrors, tested the platform, and sniffed the air inside the cabinet. Chloroform, he said at last, confirming my suspicion. A small quantity, likely applied to a cloth. Vellucci was rendered unconscious within this cabinet, then removed through some unseen means. Watson examined the floor. I knelt, peering at the wooden boards beneath the cabinet. There are scuff marks here, Holmes, I said, pointing to faint scratches in the wood, as if something heavy was dragged. Precisely, Holmes said, crouching beside me. He produced a magnifying glass from his pocket and studied the marks. The scratches are fresh, and there is a trace of mud-red clay, not native to this area. Our kidnapper was careless, or perhaps in a hurry. Miss Duval gasped. Kidnapper? You believe Maestro Vellucci was taken? I do not believe, Miss Duval, Holmes said, standing. I deduce. The chloroform, the scuff marks, the threatening note all point to a deliberate abduction. The question is how the perpetrator removed a grown man from a locked cabinet, in a crowded tent without being seen. He turned to the back of the tent, where a heavy canvas flap served as an exit. This leads to the performers' quarters, yes? Yes, Miss Duval said. And beyond that, the stables and supply tents. Holmes pushed through the flap, and we followed into a maze of smaller tents and wagons. The performers' quarters were a riot of colour and clutter, with costumes and props strewn about. Vellucci's tent was larger than the others, its interior adorned with theatrical posters and a polished desk cluttered with papers. Holmes rifled through them with practiced efficiency, pausing at a ledger filled with numbers. Vellucci's accounts, he said, scanning the pages. The circus is profitable, but there are irregularities, large payments to an unnamed party, marked only as B.J. Watson. Make a note of that initial. I scribbled in my notebook, my mind racing. Blackmail, perhaps. I suggested, possibly, Holmes said, or payment for illicit services. The circus's travels across Europe would make it an ideal vehicle for smuggling goods, information. Or worse, Miss Duval paled. Smuggling, Maestro Vellucci, would never. People are rarely what they seem. Miss Duval, Holmes interrupted, his tone not unkind. Even the most charismatic men have shadows. He moved to the costume rack, where a ringmaster's scarlet coat hung beside a top hat. The dagger, still pinning the threatening note, was embedded in the coat's lapel. Holmes extracted it carefully, examining the blade. A stiletto, Italian make, well used but sharp. The note was placed here to be found, a deliberate message. What's in your medical opinion on the blade? Could it draw blood without leaving a fatal wound? I studied the dagger, its slender blade glinting in the lantern light. It could inflict a shallow cut, enough to draw blood but not to kill, if wielded with precision. Why do you ask? Because, Holmes said, pointing to a small stain on the tent's canvas floor, there is blood here, Watson. A few drops, fresh but dried. Vellucci was injured, perhaps to subdue him, but not killed at least not here. Miss Duval stifled a cry. Then he may still be alive. It is likely, Holmes said. A dead man serves little purpose to a kidnapper, unless the goal is mere revenge. The note suggests otherwise a warning to the circus, not a declaration of murder. Holmes's examination was interrupted by a commotion outside. A burly man with a scarred face burst into the tent, his eyes wild. Miss Anna, there's trouble, he cried. The lion's cage is open, and the beast is loose. Holmes's eyes lit up, not with fear, but with exhilaration. Come, Watson. The plot thickens. We raced outside, where the troop was in chaos. The roar of a lion echoed through the fog, and performers scrambled for safety. Holmes seized a lantern and strode toward the sound, his coat billowing behind him. I gripped my revolver, my heart pounding, as Miss Duval followed close behind. The lion, a magnificent but agitated beast, prowled near the supply tents, its eyes glinting in the lantern light. Holmes raised a hand, signaling us to stay back. Calm, Watson, he said softly. The animal is frightened, not malicious. He approached slowly, his movements deliberate, and produced a small vial from his pocket. A sedative, courtesy of my chemical experiments, he murmured, tossing the vial toward the lion. It shattered, releasing a faint vapor, and within moments, the beast swayed and collapsed into a deep slumber. The troop erupted in relieved cheers. But Holmes was already moving, his attention fixed on the lion's cage. The lock was forced, he said, examining the broken mechanism. This was no accident. Someone sought to sow panic, to distract from their true purpose. He turned to Miss Duval, his expression grave. Miss Duval assembled the troop. I must question them all. Someone among you knows more than they admit. As the performers gathered, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion, I marveled at Holmes's composure. The circus, with its illusions and secrets, was a fitting stage for his genius, and I knew that whatever terror lurked in the shadows, Sherlock Holmes would bring it to light. The questioning of the troupe revealed little at first. Marco, the acrobat, was evasive, his eyes darting nervously to the shadows. Pippin, the clown, was more forthcoming, admitting to seeing a cloaked figure near the lion's cage on the night of Vellucci's disappearance. I thought it was a stagehand, he said, his painted face grotesque in the lantern light, but he moved like a ghost, silent and quick. Holmes pressed Pippin for details, but the clown's fear clouded his memory. The other performers offered similar tales of Un's flickering lights, misplaced props, and whispers in the night. Holmes listened intently, his mind cataloguing every word, every gesture, as the night wore on. The fog thickened, and the circus grounds took on an eerie stillness. Holmes dismissed the troupe, instructing Miss Duval to keep them confined to their tents. No one leaves until I return, he said. Watson, we must return to Baker Street. There are inquiries to be made, and I require my files on certain continental matters. We left Miss Duval with assurances of our swift return, and as the hansom cab carried us back through the fog, I could not shake the feeling that we were plunging into a darkness deeper than the London night. Holmes, however, was alight with purpose, his mind a beacon against the shadows. "Watson," he said as we neared Baker Street, "this case is no mere disappearance. It is a web, and at its centre is a spider of singular cunning. We must tread carefully, for the circus is but the stage, and the true drama lies elsewhere." The return to 2-1-B was a blur of exhaustion and anticipation. Holmes spent the remainder of the night poring over his files, muttering about smuggling rings and European syndicates. I retired to my room, my dreams haunted by the roar of the lion and the glint of a stiletto in the dark. The next morning, Holmes was already at work, a map of Europe spread across the table, pins marking the circus's route. "Watson," he said, without looking up, "we depart for Blackheath within the hour." Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "Then we have a clue that does not belong." "Excellent." He continued his inspection, lifting the edge of a rug to reveal a scattering of sawdust, finer than the coarse grains used in the main tent. He pocketed a sample, then examined the bed, noting a single strand of coarse black thread caught in the velvet. "Not from Velusi's costumes," he said, holding it up to the light. "This is machine-woven, likely from a coat. Our scarred visitor, perhaps." Watson watched, marveling at Holmes's ability to extract meaning from the mundane. "So, you think someone was here, in this tent, with Vellucci?" "Undoubtedly," Holmes replied, "and not as a guest. The note, the thread, the camphor all suggest an intrusion, but we need more. Miss Duval, who else in the troupe was close to Vellucci, who might know more than they've let on?" Anna hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Marco, perhaps, the acrobat. He and the maestro were thick as thieves, always whispering together. And Pippin, the clown, he's been with the circus longer than any of us. If anyone saw something, it'd be him." Holmes nodded. "Then we shall speak with them. But first, I wish to see the stage where Vellucci vanished. The scene of the crime, if indeed it is one, will tell us more than any witness." They left the tent and crossed the encampment to the main tent, its interior a cavernous space lit by flickering lanterns. The stage was a raised wooden platform, draped in crimson curtains and flanked by rows of benches, now empty. At its center stood the mirrored cabinet Anna had described, a tall, rectangular box with glass panels that reflected the dim light in fractured patterns. Holmes circled it, his fingers brushing the wood, pausing at a series of faint scuff marks near the base. "These marks," he said, crouching, "are fresh, made by boots, not slippers." And here he pointed to a smudge of grease on the cabinet's handle. "This is not stage makeup. It's mechanical, likely from a tool or weapon." Watson frowned. "You think someone tampered with the cabinet?" "More than tampered," Holmes said. "This was no accident. Someone ensured Vellucci did not emerge." He opened the cabinet's door, revealing a cramped interior lined with more mirrors. He tapped the back panel, listening to the hollow sound. "A falseback, perhaps, or a trapdoor beneath. We shall see." He knelt, examining the stage floor, but found no obvious mechanism. Undeterred, he stood and turned to Anna, who had access to this cabinet before the performance. "Only the stagehands and Vellucci himself," she said. "And me, I suppose. I helped him rehearse the act a few times." "And did you notice anything unusual that night? A stranger near the stage, perhaps?" Anna thought for a moment. "There was a man. I didn't get a good look at him. He was in the shadows, near the backstage entrance, just before the show started. I thought he was a patron who'd wandered too far, but he was gone when I looked. Again, Holmes's eyes narrowed. Describe him. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat. I couldn't see his face. He had a scarf pulled up, and it was dark. Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. Our scarred friend, perhaps, or another of his ilk. We shall need to speak with the stagehands as well. But first, let us meet this Marco and Pippin. They found Marco practicing in a clearing near the encampment, his lithe frame flipping through the air with effortless grace. He landed lightly, his dark eyes narrowing as he saw Anna with the strangers. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice clipped. "Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson are here to help find the maestro," Anna said. "They need to ask you some questions." Marco's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine. What do you want to know?" Holmes studied him, noting the faint tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted to the side. "You were close to Vellucci," he said. "What was his state of mind in the days before he vanished?" Marco shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. He was himself, busy, always planning the next show. Maybe a bit tense, but that's normal for him. Holmes stepped closer, his voice low. "And what of these late-night visitors Anna mentioned? Did you see them? Or perhaps you were one of them?" Marco's face paled, but he held Holmes's gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about. I kept to my own business." Holmes smiled thinly. "A poor liar, Mr. Marco. Your hands betray. Youth, they tremble when you speak of Vellucci. You know more than you're telling. Shall I guess? A debt, perhaps? Or a secret you shared with the maestro?" Marco took a step back, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. "You've got no proof of anything." "I'm just an acrobat." "For now," Holmes said, "but I shall be watching you." They left Marco to his practice and sought out Pippin, the clown, who was applying his makeup in a small tent filled with the cloying scent of greasepaint. His oversized shoes and polka-dotted costume contrasted sharply with the somber expression beneath his white face makeup. When Anna introduced them, Pippin's painted smile faltered. "I don't know much," he said, before Holmes could ask a question. "The maestro was good to me. I don't like to speak ill of him." "No one is asking you to," Holmes said. "But you saw something, didn't you? On the night he vanished. A figure, perhaps, near his tent." Pippin's eyes widened, his gloved hands twisting together. "How did you?" "I mean, I didn't see nothing clear, just a shadow. Someone in a cloak, moving quick. I thought it was my imagination, what with all the talk of curses." Holmes leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "And yet you did not report it." "Why?" Pippin looked away, his voice barely a whisper. "I was scared. Whoever it was, they didn't look right, like they didn't belong. I didn't want trouble." Holmes straightened, his expression unreadable. "Trouble has already found you, Pippin, but you've helped more than you know." As they left Pippin's tent, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the encampment was coming alive with the glow of lanterns and the chatter of performers, preparing for the evening's show. Watson glanced at Holmes, who was staring into the distance, his mind clearly racing. "What now, Holmes?" Watson asked. "We've got a cryptic note, a chemical odor, and a troupe full of nervous performers. It's a puzzle, all right." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "A puzzle with many pieces, Watson, but they are beginning to fit together. The note suggests a threat, the camphor, a method, and our cloaked figure a perpetrator. For Lucy's disappearance is no mere accident, it's a move in a larger game. We must learn the rules before we can play. They returned to Lucy's tent to conduct a final sweep as the circus prepared for its performance. The calliope's tune grew louder, mingling with the laughter of children and the barkers' calls. Yet, beneath the festive surface, Watson felt the weight of unseen eyes, the same tension that had gripped the troupe. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his every step purposeful. As they examined the tent once more, Holmes paused by the mirror, his fingers tracing its frame again. "This mirror," he said, almost to himself, "it's more than it seems. The camphor, the scuff marks, they point to a deception staged here, not on the main stage." Watson frowned. "You think Vellucci was taken from this tent, not the cabinet?" "Possibly," Holmes said, "or the two are connected. We need to examine that cabinet further, but not tonight. The circus is about to perform, and I wish to observe the troupe in action. Fear reveals itself in performance, Watson. Let us see who falters under the spotlight." They took seats in the main tent as the audience filed in. A mix of Londoners, eager for spectacle, and locals drawn by the circus's reputation. The lights dimmed, and the show began with a flourish of music and colour. Anna soared on her trapeze, her movements precise yet tinged with a visible strain. Marco's acrobatics were flawless, but his eyes darted to the shadows. Pippin's clowning drew laughs, but his painted smile seemed forced. Holmes watched it all, his gaze flicking from performer to performer, noting every hesitation, every glance, dot as the final actor lion-tamer, cracking his whip drew to a close. Holmes leaned toward Watson. "The troupe is frightened, but not broken," he said. "Someone here knows more than they've told. Tomorrow we shall press harder. For now, let us retire to our lodgings and consider our next move." They left the tent as the audience applauded, the night air cool against their faces. The circus glowed like a beacon in the darkness, its lights and sounds a stark contrast to the mystery that festered within. Watson felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the sense that they were stepping into a web far larger and more dangerous than he'd imagined. Holmes, however, seemed undaunted. "A fine beginning, Watson," he said, lighting his pipe as they walked back toward the city. "The circus is a stage, and every stage has its secrets. We shall uncover them, one by one." The path back to London stretched before them, the calliope's tune fading into the night. Watson glanced back at the encampment, its tents silhouetted against the starry sky. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it would test Holmes's genius and their courage to its limits. Chapter 2. The circus encampment. The late afternoon sun hung low over the outskirts of London, casting long shadows across the patchwork of fields and hedgerows that fringed the city. A faint mist curled up from the damp earth, lending an ethereal quality to the scene as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way along a rutted dirt path. The rhythmic creak of their hansom cab's wheels had faded behind them, replaced by the distant strains of a calliope, its jaunty tune-weaving through the air like a siren's call. Ahead, a sprawl of colourful tents and wagons marked the encampment of Duval's travelling circus, a vibrant island of spectacle amidst the muted greens and browns of the countryside. Holmes, clad in his customary Inverness cape, strode purposefully, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. His lean frame seemed to hum with anticipation, as though the very air carried clues waiting to be deciphered. Watson, trudging beside him, adjusted his bowler hat and clutched his medical bag, his expression a mixture of curiosity and mild exasperation. The urgent letter from Anna Duval, the trapeze artist, had arrived at 2-1 Baker Street that morning, its hurried script pleading for Holmes's aid in unraveling the mystery of Maestro Enrico Vellusi's disappearance. The promise of a theatrical puzzle had been enough to rouse Holmes from his armchair, and now, as they approached the circus grounds, Watson could sense his friend's mind already at work. The encampment came into full view as they crested a gentle rise. A vast central tent, striped in bold red and gold, dominated the scene, its peaked roof adorned with fluttering pennants that snapped in the breeze. Smaller tents and caravans radiated outward like spokes on a wheel, their canvas walls painted with images of acrobats, clowns, and exotic animals. The air was thick with the mingled scents of sawdust, roasted chestnuts, and the faint musk of livestock. Performers and roustabouts moved about, some hauling ropes or crates, others practicing their acts in open patches of grass. A tightrope walker balanced precariously on a low-slung line, while a juggler tossed flaming torches in a mesmerizing arc. Yet, beneath the vibrant surface, there was an unmistakable tension, hushed urgency in the performers' glances, a stiffness in their movements. Holmes paused at the edge of the encampment, his gaze sweeping over the scene like a general surveying a battlefield. "Observe, Watson," he said, his voice low and precise. "A circus is a microcosm of human nature, discipline and chaos, trust and deception, all bound together under a single canvas. If there is a mystery here, it will not hide for long." Watson nodded, though he privately wondered how Holmes could discern anything amidst the kaleidoscope of activity. "It's lively enough," he remarked, "but I can't say it feels welcoming. There's a shadow over this place." "Precisely," Holmes replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And it is our task to determine whether that shadow is cast by man or myth." They made their way toward the central tent, where a young woman in a spangled leotard stood waiting. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes, wide and expressive, betrayed a mixture of relief and anxiety as she spotted them. This, Watson deduced, must be Anna Duval. She hurried forward, her movements graceful despite her evident distress. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice carrying a faint French accent. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I feared you might not take my letter seriously." Holmes inclined his head. "Your letter was compelling, Miss Duval. The disappearance of a ringmaster during a performance is no small matter. Pray, lead us to where we may speak privately." Anna nodded and gestured toward a smaller tent nearby, its entrance flanked by 2 wooden poles topped with brass lanterns. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with the faint tang of canvas and lamp oil. A simple wooden table stood at the center, cluttered with papers, a few costume sketches, and a half-burned candle. Anna closed the flap behind them, shutting out the distant clamor of the circus. "Please, sit," she said, though she herself remained standing, wringing her hands. "I hardly know where to begin. Maestro Vellusi, he was the heart of our circus. To lose him so suddenly, and in such a strange way, it's shaken us all." Holmes settled into a rickety chair, his fingers steepled before him. "Begin with the night of his disappearance," he said. "Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." Anna took a deep breath, her eyes darting to the tent's entrance as if expecting an interruption. "It was 3 nights ago, during our grand finale in London. The tent was packed standing room only. Maestro Vellusi was performing his magic act, the one he always closes with. He steps into a mirrored cabinet, waves his wand, and poof, he's gone. The audience loves it. They think it's part of the show. But this time, he didn't reappear. The stagehands waited, the music looped, and nothing. I ran backstage, thinking he might be ill or delayed, but he wasn't there. No one's seen him since. Watson leaned forward, his brow furrowed, and no one saw him leave the tent. Anna shook her head. Not a soul. The stagehands checked every exit, and the performers were all accounted for. It's as if he vanished into thin air. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. A vanishing act that defies even the performer's intent. Fascinating. What of these strange occurrences you mentioned in your letter? The lights, the whispers. Anna shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. It started a week before he disappeared. At night, after the performances, some of us saw lights, flickering like willow, the wisps moving through the encampment. No lanterns, no torches, just these eerie glows. And then the whispers. Not words you could make out, but voices, low and urgent, coming from nowhere. The troupe started talking of a curse, saying the circus was haunted. Maestro Vellucci laughed it off at first, but even he seemed uneasy the last few days. Watson glanced at Holmes, expecting a dismissive remark about superstition, but Holmes's expression remained thoughtful. And what of Vellucci himself? Holmes asked. Was he troubled? Did he speak of enemies or debts? Anna hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. He was distracted, more than usual. He'd always been a private man, but lately he'd been meeting with strangers, men in dark coats who came to his tent late at night. I overheard him arguing with one of them a few days before he vanished. Something about refusing to play their game. I didn't think much of it then, but now. Holmes leaned forward, his voice sharp. Describe these men. Every detail. Anna frowned, straining to recall. I only saw one clearly. Tall, thin, with a scar across his left cheek. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't look like a circus-goer, cold, too dangerous. Holmes nodded, filing the description away. And Vellucci's tent, has it been disturbed since his disappearance? No, Anna said. We left it as it was, hoping he'd return. I can take you there now. They followed her across the encampment, weaving through a maze of ropes and stakes. The performers they passed offered guarded nods or wary glances, their faces etched with unease. A fire-eater spat a plume of flame into the air, the heat brushing Watson's cheek as they passed. A pair of clowns, their makeup half applied, whispered to each other, falling silent as Holmes approached. The sense of being watched was palpable, and Watson's hand strayed to the revolver in his coat pocket. Vellucci's tent stood apart from the others. Larger and more ornate, its canvas painted with stars and crescent moons. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of incense and aged leather. A four-poster bed, draped in velvet, occupied one corner, while a cluttered desk held stacks of letters, a quill pen, and a half-empty bottle of brandy. A trunk of costumes spilled colourful fabrics onto the floor, and a large mirror, framed in gilt, leaned against one wall. Holmes moved with the precision of a predator, his eyes darting from one detail to the next. He knelt by the desk, examining a crumpled piece of paper. Watson, observe this, he said, holding up the note.
At the time.
Handwriting was sharp and angular, the ink smudged as if written in haste. It read, "The game is set. Refuse, and the curtain falls." A threat, Watson said, his voice low. But from whom? Holmes did not answer immediately. He moved to the mirror, running his fingers along its frame, then paused, sniffing the air. Camphor, he murmured, faint but unmistakable. A chemical used in certain theatrical effects, or to mask other odors. He turned to Anna. Was Vellucci in the habit of using camphor in his act? Anna shook her head. Not that I know of. His magic was all mirrors and sleight of hand. He didn't care for chemical tricks. Ran his fingers along the inner walls, feeling for irregularities. Near the base, he found a small, hidden compartment, its edges cleverly disguised as part of the decorative trim. With a flick of his wrist, he pried it open, revealing a folded piece of paper. Watson, he called, unfolding the note with care. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged, but the words were clear. Beware the shadow that moves in silence. Trust no one. Watson peered over his shoulder, his breath catching Vellucci's hand. Likely, Holmes said, folding the note and tucking it into his pocket. He knew he was in danger, yet he chose to perform. Either he was coerced, or he believed he could outwit his enemy. The evening performance was hours away, and the troupe was preparing for another show, determined to maintain appearances despite their missing ringmaster. Holmes watched from the sidelines as acrobats rehearsed, their movements precise, but lacking their usual vigor. The air was thick with tension, the performers' laughter forced, their glances wary. Holmes's mind churned, connecting the cryptic note to the chemical odor, the scuff marks, and the mysterious visitors Anna had described. Watson, he said abruptly, we must examine Vellucci's tent again. If he left one message, there may be others. The ringmaster's tent was a study in opulence, its interior draped in velvet and adorned with trinkets from across Europe. A mahogany desk stood at one end, littered with papers, costume designs, and a half-empty bottle of brandy. Holmes rifled through the documents, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Most were mundane schedules, receipts, letters from promoters, but one item caught his eye. A small ledger, its pages filled with cryptic entries. Names, dates, and sums of money were listed alongside abbreviations Holmes didn't immediately recognize. Smuggling, perhaps, he murmured, showing the ledger to Watson. Or blackmail. These figures are too large for mere circus expenses. Watson's eyes widened. You think Vellucci was involved in something criminal? Not willingly, Holmes replied. The note suggests he was under threat. A man of his charisma and influence would be a valuable pawn in a larger game. The search yielded another clue. A single matchstick, its tip coated in a greenish residue, tucked beneath the desk. Holmes held it to his nose, detecting the same chemical odor as in the cabinet. Phosphorus-based, he said, likely used to ignite a sedative vapor. The kidnapper was meticulous. Watson, this was no amateur. As night fell, the circus came alive with the glow of lanterns and the clamor of the crowd. Holmes and Watson stood at the edge of the performance ring, watching as the troupe performed with a forced bravado. The mirrored cabinet remained unused, a silent reminder of the mystery. Holmes's gaze lingered on the audience, searching for anything out of place, a face to intent, a movement too deliberate. Watson, he said softly, keep your eyes on the crowd. Our culprit may be watching, waiting for a misstep. The doctor nodded, his hand resting on the revolver concealed beneath his coat. The performance unfolded with a surreal energy, the clown's antics and the acrobats' leaps a stark contrast to the undercurrent of fear. Holmes's mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments, the scuff marks, The chemical odor, the footprints, the button, the note, the ledger. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deception, and at its center was a figure Holmes could not yet name. As the show reached its climax, a sudden flicker of light caught Holmes's arger reflection from the upper tier of the stands, where a man in a dark cloak stood, his face obscured. Holmes's pulse quickened, but before he could move, the figure vanished into the crowd. He cursed under his breath, his mind racing. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than he had anticipated. The night ended without further incident, but Holmes's resolve was unshaken. He and Watson returned to Velusi's tent, where Holmes lit a pipe and sat in silence, his eyes distant. "The circus is a stage, Watson," he said at last, "and this abduction is merely the opening act. We must find the director before the curtain falls." Over the next several thousand words, Holmes and Watson delved deeper into the clues, reconstructing the sequence of events with meticulous detail. Holmes analyzes the chemical residue, confirming it as a chloroform derivative mixed with a rare sedative, likely sourced from a black market apothecary. He cross-references the ledger's entries with known criminal networks, identifying a pattern of payments tied to a smuggler known as Blackjack, a name that surfaces in London's underworld. The button's circus emblem leads to a secret society rumored to operate within transient communities like circuses. Using them as covers for illicit activities, Holmes conducts experiments in the tent, recreating the conditions of the magic act to test the cabinet's mechanism and the sedative's dispersal. He determines that the kidnapper used a small, handheld device to release the vapor, incapacitating Velucci within seconds. The scuff marks and footprints suggest to administer the sedative, another to carry Velucci through the rear exit to a waiting vehicle. The cryptic note, written in Velucci's hand, indicates he suspected betrayal but was unable to act in time. Watson, meanwhile, gathers accounts from other performers, uncovering rumors of Velucci's disputes with a shadowy figure who demanded control of the circus's routes. These routes, spanning Europe, were ideal for smuggling goods, from forged currency to rare artifacts. Holmes hypothesizes that Velucci's refusal to comply led to his abduction, a warning to others in the troupe. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Act. The morning mist clung to the outskirts of London like a spectral shroud, curling around the gaudy tents of Duval's travelling circus. Sherlock Holmes stood at the centre of the main performance ring, his sharp eyes scanning the sawdust-strewn ground. The air carried a faint taint of popcorn and animal musk, undercut by something sharper chemical trace that piqued his curiosity. Dr. John Watson, ever the loyal companion, stood nearby, his notebook open, scribbling observations as Holmes paced the perimeter of the stage where Maestro Enrico Velucci had vanished 2 nights prior. Holmes's lean figure cut a striking silhouette against the vibrant backdrop of the circus tent, its red and gold stripes faded under the weight of recent unease. His deerstalker cap sat slightly askew, a rare sign of the intensity with which he approached the puzzle. The ringmaster's disappearance during a magic act had left the troupe in disarray, and the performers' whispers of a curse only fueled Holmes's determination to uncover the truth. He crouched near the mirrored cabinet at the center of the stage, the prop central to Velucci's final act. Its polished surfaces gleamed under the gaslights, reflecting distorted fragments of the tent's interior. "Watson," Holmes called, his voice low but commanding. "Note the scuff marks here, along the base of the cabinet. They're irregular, not the smooth wear of regular use. And this," he leaned closer, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled, A faint chemical odor, acrid, not unlike chloroform. What does that suggest to you? Watson, adjusting his spectacles, stepped forward, peering at the cabinet. Foul play, I'd wager. Chloroform could incapacitate a man quickly, especially in a confined space like this. But why go to such lengths? Vellucci was the heart of the circus. Who would benefit from his removal? Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, the kind that signaled his mind was already racing ahead. Precisely the question, Watson. But first, let us reconstruct the night in question. Every detail matters. The mirrored cabinet, a masterpiece. Of stagecraft, stood nearly 7 feet tall, its panels inlaid with intricate carvings of stars and crescent moons. It was designed for Vellucci's signature act, the Vanishing Maestro, where he would step inside, close the door, and reappear moments later in a puff of smoke at the back of the tent. The audience had roared with delight on countless nights. But 2 evenings ago, the trick had failed spectacularly. Vellucci had entered the cabinet, the door had closed, and when it reopened, he was going to flourish. No reappearance, only silence and a stunned crowd. Holmes circled the cabinet, his fingers tracing the edges of the mirrored panels. The mechanism is simple enough, he mused aloud. A rotating false wall, concealed by the mirror's reflections, allows the performer to slip out the back, while the audience sees only an empty interior. But the timing, he paused, pressing his hand against the rear panel. It gave slightly, revealing a hidden latch. This was tampered with. See the scratches here? Someone forced the panel open from the outside, not part of the act's design. Watson frowned, jotting down the observation. So, someone entered the cabinet during the performance. But the stage was lit, the audience watching. How could they go unnoticed? Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of deduction. Distraction. Watson, the circus thrives on it. Bright lights, loud music, the crowd's attention fixed on the spectacle. A skilled intruder could exploit those moments. But we need more than theory. Let us examine the stage itself. The 2 men moved to the wooden platform, its surface scuffed from years of performances. Holmes dropped to his knees, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting every inch of the boards. Near the edge of the stage, he paused, his fingers brushing against a series of faint grooves. Watson, look here. These marks are fresh, likely from boots dragging across the wood. They lead toward the cabinet, but stop abruptly, as if the person was lifted or carried, lifted. Watson echoed, his brow furrowing. Vellucci is no small man. It would take strength to move him against his will, especially if he was unconscious. Indeed. Holmes replied, his voice distant as he followed the trail with his eyes. And yet, the absence of blood or signs of a struggle suggests he was incapacitated swiftly. The chemical odor points to a sedative, likely administered inside the cabinet. But how was he removed without the audience noticing? The answer lay in the tent's layout, which Holmes had memorized upon their arrival. The main stage was flanked by heavy curtains, behind which performers could enter and exit unseen. Beyond the curtains, a narrow corridor led to the troops, private quarters and storage areas. Holmes beckoned Watson to follow as he slipped behind the velvet drapes, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. The corridor was dimly lit, its walls lined with props and costumes, but Holmes's attention was drawn to the ground. Here, he said, pointing to a patch of sawdust disturbed by heavy footprints. 2 sets of tracks, one larger, one smaller. The larger ones are deep, suggesting weight perhaps, Vellucci being carried. The smaller ones are lighter, likely the assailant. They moved toward the rear exit, but notice he knelt again, his magnifying glass catching the faint glint of something metallic embedded in the dirt. With a delicate touch, he extracted a small, tarnished button, its surface etched with a circus emblem. A clue, Watson said, his voice tinged with excitement. Could it belong to the kidnapper? Possibly, Holmes replied, slipping the button into a small envelope. Or it may have been planted to mislead us. We must remain cautious. The circus is a world of illusions, and nothing is as it seems. The rear exit opened to the encampment's outer grounds, where the performers' caravans and animal cages formed a labyrinth of shadows. The mist had thickened, obscuring the distant lights of London, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp grass and coal smoke. Holmes stood motionless, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he could see through the fog itself. The kidnapper would need a means of transport, he said, a cart or carriage, something inconspicuous yet capable of carrying a man. Watson made inquiries among the performers about any vehicles seen leaving the grounds that night. Watson nodded, though his expression betrayed a flicker of unease. Holmes, do you suspect one of the troupe? They all seemed genuinely shaken by Velusi's disappearance. Fear can be genuine, yet motives remain hidden, Holmes replied. The circus is a transient world, Watson. Its people are bound by loyalty, but also by secrets. We must peel back the layers. The investigation continued into the afternoon, with Holmes and Watson interviewing key performers. Anna Duval, the trapeze artist who had summoned them, was a study in contrast, graceful yet guarded, her dark eyes darting nervously as she spoke. Maestro Vellucci was like a father to us, she said, twisting a silk scarf in her hands. He never spoke of enemies, but there were whispers. Strange men visited the camp late at night, always cloaked, always leaving before dawn. Holmes's interest sharpened. Did you see these men yourself? Anna hesitated, then nodded. Once, near the lion's cage, I thought they were creditors. But Vellucci dismissed my concerns. He said it was business, nothing more. Business, Holmes repeated, his tone skeptical. And where was he last seen before the performance? In his tent, preparing for the act. He seemed distracted, almost frightened. I thought it was nerves, but now, her voice trailed off, and she looked away, her fingers tightening. Around the scarf, Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson, who was scribbling furiously. The doctor's instincts leaned towards sympathy, but Holmes's mind was already piecing together a pattern. Velluci's fear, the chemical odor, the scuff marks. The footprints all pointed to a calculated abduction, not a spontaneous act. But the why remained elusive, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the encampment. Holmes returned to the mirrored cabinet. He opened its door, stepping inside to test the mechanism himself. The interior was cramped, barely large enough for a man of Velluci's stature. Holmes. Chapter 4. The shadow of Moriarty. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator's cloak, swirling around the gas lamps and casting long, wavering shadows as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of their hansom cab. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp cobblestones, a familiar perfume of the city's underbelly. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, his mind already dissecting the clue that had brought them here. A monogrammed cigarette case, its silver surface etched with a single, elegant M. It had been found in Maestro Enrico Velluci's tent. nestled among the ringmaster's belongings as if deliberately placed to taunt. To Holmes, it was more than a trinket, was a thread in a tapestry of intrigue, one that pointed toward a familiar and formidable foe. Watson, bundled in his overcoat against the evening chill, adjusted his hat and glanced at Holmes. "You're certain about this, Holmes? A cigarette case with an M could belong to anyone. Why leap to Moriarty?" His tone carried the weight of skepticism, tempered by years of witnessing Holmes's uncanny deductions. Holmes's lips curved into a faint, almost predatory smile. "My dear Watson, the world is full of M's, but few carry the audacity to leave such a calling card in the midst of a crime. The craftsmanship of the case sterling silver, engraved with a flourish that bespeaks both wealth and arrogance. The field. Add to that the context. A ringmaster vanishes from a circus, a place of illusion and misdirection, and this item appears. It is not coincidence, Watson, it is design." They stood before a narrow alley off Drury Lane, where the circus had drawn crowds only days before. The vibrant posters advertising Duval's travelling circus still clung to the brick walls, their colours muted by the fog. The sounds of Londoner, distant clatter of hooves, the muffled shouts of a street vendor, seemed to fade as Holmes led the way toward a nondescript door tucked into the alley's shadows. It was here, according to a tip from one of Holmes's less savoury informants, that they might find answers about the cigarette case and its owner. Holmes rapped sharply on the door, his gloved hand precise. The sound echoed, unanswered at first. Watson shifted uneasily, his hand resting near the revolver in his coat pocket. "If this is Moriarty's doing," he murmured, "we're walking into the lion's den. Precisely why we must tread." "Carefully," Holmes replied, his voice low. "Moriarty does not act without purpose. If he is involved, the circus is but a stage for a larger scheme. We must uncover his script." The door creaked open, revealing a wiry man with a pock-marked face and wary eyes. He wore a stained apron, and the faint smell of tobacco and cheap gin clung to him. "What's your business?" he growled, his gaze darting between Holmes and Watson. Holmes adopted a disarming smile, his demeanour shifting to that of a curious gentleman rather than a relentless detective. "Good evening, my friend. We are inquiring about a certain item, a silver cigarette case, monogrammed with an M. We believe it may have passed through your establishment. Might we have a word?" The man hesitated, his fingers twitching, at his side. Holmes's eyes flicked to the motion, noting the bulge of a knife beneath the apron. "Don't know nothing about no cigarette case," the man said, his voice too quick. "You best be off." Holmes's smile didn't waver, but his tone sharpened. "I suggest you reconsider. My associate here, Dr. Watson, is a man of medicine, but he is also skilled in other arts. It would be unfortunate if this conversation required persuasion." Watson, catching the cue, straightened and fixed the man with a steady gaze, his hand now openly resting on his revolver. The man's bravado faltered. With a muttered curse, he stepped aside, allowing them into a dimly lit room that reeked of stale smoke and sawdust. Crates lined the walls, some stamped with the circus's emblem, lion's head wreathed in flames. A table in the centre held a scattering of papers, a half-empty bottle of gin, and, to Holmes's keen interest, a ledger. "Speak plainly," Holmes said, his eyes locking onto the man's. "Who brought the cigarette case here, and what is its connection to the circus?" The man, who introduced himself as Ned, licked his lips nervously. "I ain't in the habit of crossing folk like that. You don't know who you're dealing with. I have a fair idea, Holmes said, leaning closer. A man of considerable intellect, with a penchant for orchestrating chaos from the shadows. His initials, I presume, match the monogram. Tell me what you know of him, and I may overlook your role in this affair. Ned's eyes widened, and he glanced toward the door as if expecting rescue or retribution. After a tense silence, he spoke in a hushed tone. It was a job, see. Couple of weeks back, a gent comes in, all proper-like, with a voice smooth as silk. Didn't give no name, but he had that case, flashing it like it was a badge. Said he needed goods moved through the circus mall packages. Nothing big, but secret-like, said the ringmaster. Bellucci was in on it. Holmes's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced. And these packages, what were they? Ned shrugged, his eyes darting away. Didn't ask, didn't want to know. Looked like letters, maybe documents, sealed tight. He paid well, and I ain't one to pry. Watson frowned. And Bellucci, was he part of this willingly? Ned hesitated, then shook his head. Didn't seem so. Last I heard, he was arguing with the gent. Said he wouldn't do it no more. Next thing, Bellucci's gone, and the circus is in a panic. Holmes picked up the ledger from the table, flipping through its pages with practiced ease. Rows of numbers and cryptic notations filled the sheets, alongside names of suppliers and destinations. One entry caught his eye. A shipment marked MV to an address in Whitechapel, dated the night of Bellucci's disappearance. This, Holmes said, tapping the page, is no mere coincidence. Watson, we have a trail. As they left the dingy room, Holmes's mind was already weaving the threads together. The cigarette case, the smuggling operation, Bellucci's refusal, it all pointed to a calculated move by Moriarty. The professor, Holmes knew, thrived on manipulating others, turning their fears and ambitions into levers for his schemes. The circus, with its transient nature and diverse cast, was an ideal vehicle for moving illicit goods across borders, unnoticed by authorities. But why target Bellucci? And why leave the cigarette case as a clue? They hailed another cab, this time, bound for Whitechapel. The address in the ledger led to a warehouse, its windows dark and its doors bolted. Holmes examined the lock, producing a set of picks from his pocket with the ease of a conjurer. A simple mechanism, he murmured, but effective for keeping out the curious. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and barrels, the air heavy with the scent of tar and mildew. Holmes moved with purpose, his lantern casting sharp beams across the shadows. Near the back, he found what he sought, a crate marked with the same lion's head emblem as the circus. Prying it open, he revealed a cache of sealed envelopes. There, wax seals unbroken, each bore a faint watermark, a spider, its web radiating outward. Moriarty's mark, Holmes said, his voice barely above a whisper. He is not merely involved, Watson, he is the architect. These envelopes likely contain forged documents, perhaps banknotes or bonds, intended to flood the market and destabilize the economy. The circus was his courier, and Bellucci's refusal threatened the entire operation. Watson's jaw tightened. But why leave the cigarette case? If Moriarty is as clever as you say, why risk exposure? Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. Because, Watson, he wants me to know. This is no mere crime, it is a challenge. Moriarty thrives on the game, and I am his opponent. The cigarette case is his opening move, daring me to pursue him. As they exited the warehouse, the fog seemed thicker, the city more oppressive. Holmes's mind was alight with possibilities. each clue a piece in a puzzle only he could fully see. For Lucy's disappearance was no isolated act, but part of a grander design, one that stretched from the sawdust-strewn tents of the circus to the shadowed corridors of Moriarty's empire. The professor was testing him, probing his limits, and Holmes felt the thrill of the chase quicken his pulse. "We must return to the circus at once," Holmes said, his voice resolute. "There are questions yet unanswered, and I suspect the performers know more than they've revealed. Moriarty's influence lingers, and we must root it out before his next move." Watson nodded, though his expression betrayed concern. "If Moriarty is behind this, Holmes, we're up against more than a criminal. He's a devil, indeed," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing. "But even devils leave footprints, and I intend to follow them." The cab rattled through the fog, carrying them back toward the circus grounds. Holmes's thoughts churned, piecing together the fragments of evidence: the cigarette case, the ledger, the spider-marked envelopes. Each was a note in Moriarty's symphony of chaos, and Holmes was determined to disrupt the performance. The game was afoot, and the shadow of Moriarty loomed larger with every step. The circus encampment was a different beast under the cover of night. The vibrant colors of the tents were muted, the laughter and music replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional snort of a horse or the rustle of canvas in the wind. Holmes and Watson moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the sawdust that coated the ground. The performers' tents were clustered tightly, their flaps closed against the chill. Holmes's eyes scanned the scene, noting every detail: a flickering lantern in the distance, a shadow moving briefly against a tent wall, the faint smell of chemicals lingering in the air. They approached Lucy's tent, now cordoned off by the troop's manager, a stout man named Mr. Grayson. He greeted them with a scowl, his mustache twitching with irritation. "Back again, are you? I told you, Mr. Holmes, we've nothing more to say. The troop's shaken enough without you poking about." Holmes ignored the protest, brushing past Grayson to examine the tent's interior. The cigarette case had been found here, tucked beneath a pile of Lucy's costumes. Holmes knelt, his fingers tracing the ground. "The sawdust here is disturbed," he said, almost to himself. "Not from foot traffic, but from something being dragged." And this, he lifted a small vial half buried in the dirt, its contents evaporated, but leaving a faint acrid residue. "Chloroform," Holmes declared, holding the vial to the light. "Used to subdue Vellucci, no doubt. The chemical odor I detected in the mirrored cabinet during his vanishing act is consistent. Whoever took him was methodical, ensuring he could not resist." Watson peered over his shoulder. But why leave the cigarette case? If they went to such lengths to cover their tracks, why leave a clue pointing to Moriarty? Holmes stood, pocketing the vial. "Because, Watson, the case was not left by mistake. It is a taunt, a signal that this is no ordinary crime. Moriarty wants me to know he is involved, to draw me into his web. He thrives on the intellectual duel, and this is his invitation." Grayson, hovering nearby, scoffed. "Moriarty, you're spinning tales now, Mr. Holmes. This is a circus, not some criminal empire. Vellucci probably ran off with a mistress or drowned his sorrows in a bottle." Holmes turned, his gaze piercing. "Mr. Grayson, your ringmaster was abducted, likely because he defied a powerful enemy. Denying the evidence will not protect your troop. If you wish to see the circus survive, you will assist me. Who among the performers had contact with outsiders recently? Smugglers, perhaps, or men of dubious character?" Grayson's bluster faded under Holmes's scrutiny. Well, there's Marco, the acrobat. He's been jumpy lately, always looking over his shoulder. And Pippin, the clown, he's been muttering about seeing things at night. But they're performers, not criminals. Holmes nodded, filing the information away. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Watson, we shall speak with Marco and Pippin at once. Their fear may be our key to unlocking this mystery. They found Marco practicing in the main tent, his lithe form twisting through the air on a trapeze. His movements were precise but lacked the confidence of a seasoned performer. When he spotted Holmes and Watson, he faltered, nearly missing a catch. He descended, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes darting nervously. Mr. Marco, Holmes began, his tone measured. I understand you've been under some strain. Debts, perhaps, or dealings with men who do not take kindly to refusal. Marco's face paled, and he glanced toward the tent's entrance. I don't know what you mean, he stammered. I'm just an acrobat. Holmes stepped closer, his voice low and compelling. Do not play the fool, Marco. I know of your debts to a certain syndicate, one that operates under the aegis of a man whose initial adorns a certain cigarette case. Tell me what you know of Velusi's dealings with them, or I shall ensure Scotland Yard takes an interest in your affairs. Marco's shoulders slumped, defeat written in his posture. All right, he whispered. Velucci, he was in deep. They wanted him to move things papers, maybe money through the circus. We travel everywhere, see? No one suspects a circus. But Velucci, he got cold feet, said he wouldn't do it anymore. That's when he disappeared. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and the man who approached him, describe him, tall, thin, like a spider, Marco said, shuddering. Cold eyes, voice like he could talk you into anything. He didn't give a name, but he had that cigarette case, kept spinning it in his fingers, like he was daring me to ask about it. Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. The description matched Moriarty, perfectly elegant, calculating, and utterly ruthless. Did this man say anything about his plans? Watson asked. Marco shook his head, only that Velucci had made a mistake. Said there'd be consequences if the job wasn't done. Holmes nodded, his mind racing. Thank you, Marco. Stay within the camp and speak of this to no one. Your safety depends on it. As they left the tent, Watson's expression was grim. Moriarty's playing a dangerous game, Holmes. If he's using the circus to move forged currency, as you suspect, this could cripple London's economy. Indeed, Holmes replied, but Moriarty's ambitions are never so small. This is a test, Watson, a gambit to draw me out while he advances his larger scheme. We must find Velucci before Moriarty's next move. The circus holds more secrets, and I intend to uncover them all. The night deepened as they moved toward Pippin's tent. The clown's garish makeup and costume a stark contrast to the fear in his eyes. Holmes's questions were sharp, cutting through Pippin's evasions until the clown admitted to seeing a cloaked figure near Velusi's tent the night of the disappearance. He moved like a ghost, Pippin said, his voice trembling. I thought it was part of the act at first, but then I smelled something sharp, like medicine. I didn't say nothing, didn't want to end up like Velucci. Holmes's expression was unreadable, but his mind was alight. The pieces were falling into place. The chloroform, the cigarette case, the smuggling operation, and now a cloaked figure, Moriarty's agent, no doubt. The circus was a microcosm of Moriarty's empire, a stage where his machinations played out in miniature. But Holmes was no mere spectator. He would rewrite the script, turning Moriarty's challenge into his own victory, as they returned to their lodgings at 2-1B Baker Street. The fog seemed to pulse with menace, as if Moriarty himself were watching from the shadows. Holmes sat by the fire, his violin untouched, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. The cigarette case rested on the table, its silver surface catching the firelight. It was a challenge, a taunt, and a promise of the battle to come. Moriarty had made his move, and Holmes was ready to counter. The game, as always, was afoot. Chapter 5. The acrobat's secret. The morning sun cast a pale glow over the circus encampment, its rays filtering through the heavy canvas of the performers' tents. Sherlock Holmes, clad in his familiar tweed coat, moved with purpose through the muddy paths, his sharp eyes scanning every detail of the chaotic scene. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust, damp grass, and the faint tank of animal musk from the nearby menagerie. Beside him, Dr. John Watson trudged along, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, his notebook clutched tightly as he scribbled observations. The circus, vibrant and alluring under the glow of gaslights the previous night, now seemed weary and worn in the daylight, its performers nursing the weight of fear and suspicion. Holmes's mind was a whirl of deductions, each clue from the previous day's investigations slotting into place like pieces of a vast, intricate puzzle. The cryptic note found in Maestro Enrico Vellusi's tent, the scuff marks on the mirrored cabinet, and the lingering chemical odor all pointed to a calculated act rather than a theatrical vanishing. Yet the mention of a curse by Anna Duval, the trapeze artist, and the troupe's palpable unease suggested a deeper layer of intrigue. Holmes had little patience for superstition, but he recognized its power to mask truth and manipulate minds. His current objective was clear: to interrogate Marco, the acrobat whose nervous glances and evasive answers during their initial meeting had marked him as a person of interest. The acrobat's tent stood at the edge of the encampment, its faded red and yellow stripes sagging under the weight of morning dew. As Holmes and Watson approached, they heard the soft creak of ropes and the rustle of canvas, a reminder of the transient life these performers led. Holmes paused at the entrance, his keen senses detecting the faint sound of pacing footsteps. Within, he exchanged a glance with Watson, who nodded, his hand instinctively resting near the reassuring weight of his revolver, though he hoped it would not be needed. "Mr. Marco," Holmes called, his voice firm but not unkind. "A moment of your time, if you please." The pacing stopped abruptly. After a moment's hesitation, the tent flap parted, revealing Marco, a lean man in his late 20s with dark, tousled hair and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. His costume, a tight-fitting ensemble of black and silver, hung loosely on his frame as though he had lost weight in recent days. His hands fidgeted, betraying a nervousness that Holmes noted with interest. "Mr. Holmes." "Dr. Watson," Marco said, his voice tinged with a faint Italian accent. I wasn't expecting you so early. What do you want?" Holmes stepped inside, his tall frame casting a shadow across the cluttered interior. The tent was a jumble of props, juggling clubs, a worn leather satchel, and a small mirror propped against a crate. A single lantern hung from the central pole, casting flickering light over the scene. Watson followed, his eyes scanning the space for anything out of the ordinary, though he deferred to Holmes's uncanny ability to discern significance in the mundane. "We are here to discuss Maestro Vellusi's disappearance," Holmes began, his tone measured. "Your behavior yesterday suggested you know more than you've shared. I advise you to speak plainly, Marco. Time is a luxury we do not have. Marco's shoulders tensed, and he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed more an attempt to steady himself than to tidy his appearance. "I've told you what I know," he said, his voice rising slightly. The maestro vanished during his act. I was on the trapeze, halfway across the tent. I saw nothing. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. "Your words are rehearsed, Marco, but your manner betrays you. The slight tremor in your left hand, the way your eyes avoid mine, the perspiration on your brow despite the cool morning, these are not the signs of a man at ease with his story. You are withholding something. What is it?" Marco's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed he might bolt. Watson shifted his stance, ready to intervene, but Holmes raised a hand, signaling patience. The detective stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone. "Whatever burden you carry, Marco, it will not lighten by silence. If you fear retribution, know that I have faced greater threats than those who might intimidate. A circus acrobat. Speak, and I will ensure your safety." The acrobat's resolve wavered. He sank onto a wooden stool, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. "You don't understand," he muttered. "It's not just about me. It's bigger than the circus, bigger than Vellucci." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced. "Then enlighten me," he said. "What is bigger than the disappearance of your ringmaster?" Marco hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the tent flap as if expecting an intruder. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Debts. I owe money more than I can ever repay. Not to banks or lenders, but to men you don't cross. They came to me months ago, after a show in Manchester. They knew things about my past, my family. They said I could work off what I owed by helping them." "Helping them how?" Watson asked, his pen pausing over his notebook. Marco's gaze dropped to the floor. "The circus moves from city to city. We cross borders, carry costumes, equipment. They wanted me to. Slip things into the shipments, small packages, sealed, no questions asked. I refused at first, but they threatened my sister in Naples. I had no choice." Holmes's mind was already piecing together. The implications, the circus, with its constant travel and transient nature, was an ideal vehicle for smuggling. Vellucci's disappearance, the cryptic note, the chemical odor all suggested a larger operation, one that had turned violent when its plans were thwarted, and Vellucci Holmes pressed. What was his role in this? Marco's hands trembled. "The maestro," he found out. "I don't know how, but he caught me hiding a package in one of the prop trunks. He was furious. Said he'd built this circus on trust, that he wouldn't let it become a tool for criminals. He confronted me, threatened to go to the police. That was 2 days before he vanished." Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of a new lead. "Did you inform your creditors of Vellucci's intentions?" Marco shook his head vehemently. "No, I swear I didn't tell them. I begged the maestro to stay quiet, to let me handle it. I thought I could convince them to leave the circus alone. But then he was gone." Watson frowned, his practical mind grappling with the story. "These men you owe, what do they want? Drugs? Weapons?" "I don't know," Marco admitted. "The packages were always sealed. I never looked inside, but they were heavy, and sometimes I heard ticking like a clock. I thought maybe it was mechanical, but I didn't dare open them." Holmes paced the small tent, his mind racing through possibilities. The ticking suggested precision instruments, perhaps even explosives, though that seemed unlikely given the circus's public nature. More likely, the packages contained contraband of a financial nature, forged documents, counterfeit currency, or stolen valuables. The monogrammed cigarette case with the initial M flickered in his thoughts, a tantalizing hint of Moriarty's involvement. If the professor was behind this, the stakes were far higher than a mere smuggling ring. "Who are these men, Marco?" Holmes asked, stopping abruptly and fixing the acrobat with a stare that seemed to pierce his soul. "Names, descriptions, anything you can provide." Marco swallowed hard. "I only dealt with one man directly. He called himself Black Jack, tall, thin, with a scar across his left cheek. He always wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He'd show up after performances, always in the shadows, always alone. But he spoke of others, a boss who didn't tolerate failure. I never saw him, but Black Jack was terrified of him." Holmes nodded, filing away the description. Black Jack was likely a low-level operative, a cog in a larger machine. The real question was, who pulled the strings, and whether that figure was indeed Moriarty. And the night Vellucci disappeared. Holmes continued, "Where were you?" "On the trapeze, like I said," Marco replied, his voice steadier now. "I was mid-performance, swinging across the tent. The crowd was cheering, the lights were bright. I couldn't see the stage clearly, but I heard the gasps when the maestro's act went wrong. By the time I came down, he was gone." Holmes's mind flashed to the mirrored cabinet, the scuff marks, the chemical odor. Marco's alibi was plausible, but it didn't rule out complicity. The acrobat could have signaled an accomplice or played a role in setting up the act. Yet his fear seemed genuine, and Holmes sensed that Marco was more a pawn than a mastermind. "Very well," Holmes said, his tone softening slightly. "You've done well to speak, Marco, but I must warn you any further deception will not be tolerated. If you receive contact from Black Jack or his associates, you will inform me immediately. Is that clear?" Marco nodded, his face pale. "I will, Mr. Holmes. I just want this to be over." Holmes turned to leave, but paused at the tent flap. One final question. The note in Vellucci's tent. "The shadow moves before the light. Did you write it, or do you know its meaning?" Marco shook his head. "I've never heard it before, I swear." Holmes studied him for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Stay within the encampment, Marco, for your safety and ours." As Holmes and Watson stepped back into the morning light, Watson exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "Do you believe him, Holmes? He's frightened, but that could be guilt as much as fear." Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. "Fear and guilt are not mutually exclusive, Watson. Marco is entangled in this web, but I suspect he is not its weaver. His story aligns with the evidence, the smuggling, the blackmail, the refusal that likely precipitated Vellucci's disappearance. But the note that troubles me, it's too poetic, too deliberate for a thug like Black Jack. It suggests a mind of greater sophistication." They began walking back toward the main tent, the sounds of the circus stirring to life, around them performers practicing, animals being fed, the rhythmic clanging of a blacksmith repairing a wagon. Watson glanced at Holmes, whose brow was furrowed in thought. "You still think Moriarty's involved, don't you? The cigarette case, the scale of the operation, the precision of the abductional point to a mind capable of orchestrating chaos while remaining unseen." Holmes replied, Moriarty thrives in such shadows, but we need more than suspicion. We need evidence. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from across the encampment. Anna Duval, her trapeze costume replaced by a simple dress, ran toward them, her face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you must come quickly. Pippin's found something." Holmes's eyes lit up, the prospect of a new clue igniting his restless mind. "Lead the way, Miss Duval," he said, striding forward with renewed purpose. They followed Anna to the menagerie, where Pippin, the troop's clown, stood beside a cage housing a pair of restless lions. His painted face was absent, revealing a surprisingly youthful man with wide, anxious eyes. In his hand, he held a small, tarnished object, which he extended to Holmes. "I found this in the hay, near the lion's cage," Pippin said, his voice trembling. "It was hidden, like someone didn't want it found." Holmes took the object, a brass key, its surface etched with a faint circus emblem. He turned it over in his gloved hands, his mind already racing through its implications. "When did you find it?" he asked. "Just now, when I was feeding the animals," Pippin replied. "I didn't touch it until I saw it glint in the light. I thought, maybe it's important." Holmes examined the key closely, noting its weight and the precision of its craftsmanship. "This is no ordinary key," he murmured. "The emblem matches the one on the coin we found earlier. Watson, do you recall the ledger we saw in Velusi's tent? It mentioned a locked chest in the prop wagon. This may be the key to it." Watson nodded, his mind catching up. "If that chest contains the contraband Marco mentioned, it could lead us to Black Jack or whoever he works for." "Precisely," Holmes said, slipping the key into his pocket. "Miss Duval, Pippin, you've done well. Say nothing of this to anyone else. The fewer who know, the better." As Anna and Pippin nodded, Holmes turned to Watson. "We must examine that chest immediately. If it holds what I suspect, we are closer to unraveling this mystery than I dared hope." The two men made their way to the prop wagon, a hulking structure parked near the edge of the encampment. Its wooden sides were weathered, its wheels caked with mud from countless journeys. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of paint and old canvas. Holmes's eyes scanned the cluttered interior, quickly locating a heavy oak chest tucked beneath. A pile of ropes and tarps. The lock was sturdy, its surface bearing the same circus emblem as the key. Holmes inserted the key, and with a satisfying click, the lock sprang open. Inside, they found not contraband, but a collection of documents, letters, maps, and a small notebook filled with cryptic symbols. Holmes leafed through the notebook, his expression darkening. "These are ciphers," he said, his voice low. "Sophisticated ones, likely used to communicate with the syndicate. The maps mark routes across Europe, likely the circus's travel itinerary, and these letters." He paused, holding one up to the light. "They bear the same monogram as the cigarette case. M." Watson's eyes widened. "Moriarty." "Perhaps," Holmes said, though his tone was cautious. "But we must not leap to conclusions. The evidence is mounting, but we need more. These documents confirm the circus was being used as a conduit for something illicit, likely forgery. Given the precision of the operation, Velusi's refusal to cooperate made him a liability, hence his abduction." As they secured the chest and prepared to leave, a shadow moved outside the wagon. Holmes's hand shot up, silencing Watson. They crept to the door, peering out into the fading light. A figure darted behind a nearby tent, too quick to identify. Holmes's instincts urged pursuit, but he hesitated. The encampment was a maze, and their quarry had the advantage of familiarity. "Watson," Holmes said quietly, "we are being watched. Our discovery has not gone unnoticed. We must proceed with utmost caution." They returned to their temporary quarters in the encampment, a small tent provided by Anna. As night fell, Holmes sat by the lantern, poring over the notebook's ciphers, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. Watson watched, marveling at his friend's relentless focus. "What now, Holmes?" he asked. "We decode these ciphers," Holmes replied, not looking up. "They hold the key to the syndicate's plans and, I suspect, to Velusi's fate. Tomorrow we confront Pippin again. His discovery of the key was fortuitous, but I am not yet convinced it was accidental." The night passed in uneasy silence, broken only by the distant roar of the lions and the creak of the circus settling around them. Holmes worked tirelessly, his mind a machine of logic and intuition, piecing together the threads of a plot that threatened not only the circus but the stability of London's underworld. The shadow of Moriarty loomed ever larger, but Holmes knew that only hard evidence would bring the mastermind into the light by dawn. Holmes had cracked the first cipher, revealing a message that confirmed his suspicions. The circus was indeed a front for a forgery operation, with Velusi's abduction meant to silence his dissent. The message mentioned a meeting at a tavern in London's East End, where Black Jack was to deliver a shipment. Holmes resolved to follow this lead, but first he needed to ensure the safety of the troupand Marco, whose confession had set this chain of events in motion. As the circus prepared for another day, Holmes and Watson stood at the edge of the encampment, watching the performers go about their routines. The air was thick with tension, the weight of secrets pressing down on every soul. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. The game was afoot, and he was closing in on his quarry. Chapter 6. The Clown's Confession. The London fog clung to the cobblestones like a shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way back to the circus encampment. The night was heavy with the scent of damp earth and coal smoke, and the distant hum of the city seemed to fade as they approached the sprawling tents on the outskirts. The circus grounds, vibrant and chaotic during the day, now stood eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of a wagon or the soft whinny of a horse from the stables. The events of the past, Days Mistro, Enrico Velusi's vanishing, the cryptic note in his tent, and the mounting fear among the performers had woven a tapestry of mystery that Holmes was determined to unravel. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows, led the way toward the performers' quarters, his long coat flapping slightly in the breeze. Watson followed, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, his mind still grappling with the peculiarities of the case. The circus, with its kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, had initially seemed a world apart from the grim underbelly of London's criminal networks. Yet Holmes's deductions had begun to peel back the layers, revealing threads that might connect to a larger, more sinister design. "Holmes," Watson said, breaking the silence as they passed a row of flickering lanterns, "do you truly believe this disappearance is more than a theatrical stunt? The performers are a dramatic lot, perhaps. Velusi orchestrated this to draw crowds." Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. "My dear Watson, a stunt requires an audience, and Velusi's absence has driven patrons away, not toward the circus. No, this is no act of showmanship. The scuff marks in the mirrored cabinet, the chemical odor, I detected chloroform, I suspect point to foul play." We must press deeper into the troop's secrets. Their destination was the small, weathered tent belonging to Pippin, the circus's clown. Anna Duval, the trapeze artist who had summoned them, had mentioned Pippin's nervous behavior since the ringmaster's disappearance. Holmes, ever attuned to the subtle shifts in human demeanor, had marked the clown as a potential key to the mystery. Pippin's tent stood at the edge of the encampment, its canvas sagging slightly, as if reflecting the weight of its occupants' fears as they approached. A faint light glowed from within, casting distorted shadows against the tent's walls. Holmes raised a hand, signaling Watson to pause. He tilted his head, listening. From inside came a soft, rhythmic sound, nervous tapping, perhaps of fingers against wood. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he stepped forward, rapping sharply on the tent pole. "Mr. Pippin," Holmes called, his voice calm but commanding. "Sherlock, Holmes and Dr. Watson, we require a word." The tapping ceased abruptly. There was a moment of silence, followed by a rustle of fabric and the creak of a chair. The tent flap parted, revealing Pippin's painted face, though the grease paint was smudged, giving him a haggard appearance. His oversized costume hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes darted between Holmes and Watson, wide with apprehension. "Mr. Holmes," Pippin stammered, his voice high and unsteady. I wasn't expecting visitors. It's late, you see, and I was just no need for excuses," Holmes interrupted, stepping into the tent without waiting for an invitation. Watson followed, noting the cluttered interior, a small cot, a table strewn with makeup pots, and a trunk overflowing with colorful props. The air smelled faintly of grease paint and something sharper fear, perhaps. Holmes's gaze swept the room, cataloguing every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. "You have been avoiding us, Mr. Pippin," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Since Maestro Valusi's disappearance, you have kept to yourself, declining to join the other performers in their discussions with us. Why?" Pippin's hands twisted together, his oversized gloves making the gesture almost comical. "I've been busy, Mr. Holmes. Rehearsals, you know. The show must go on, even with the maestro gone." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "The show has not gone on, Mr. Pippin. The circus has cancelled performances for 3 nights running. Your absence from our inquiries suggests either guilt or fear. Which is it?" Watson, standing near the tent flap, watched Pippin closely. The clown's shoulders slumped, and he sank onto the cot, his painted smile a stark contrast to the distress in his eyes. "I'm not guilty," he whispered, "but I'm afraid. God help me, I'm afraid." Holmes leaned forward, his voice softening but losing none of its authority. "Tell me what you saw, Mr. Pippin. The truth, now. It is your only path to safety." Pippin's gaze flickered to Watson, then back to Holmes, as if weighing his options. Finally, he exhaled a shaky breath and began to speak. "It was the night the maestro vanished. I was in my tent, getting ready for the late show. I stepped outside to fetch water from the barrel near the main tent. That's when I saw a figure, cloaked, moving near the maestro's tent. It was dark, but the lanterns caught the edge of the cloak. Black it was, with a hood. I thought it was one of the stagehands at first, but something wasn't right. The way they moved, so quiet, like a shadow." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but Watson could sense the gears turning in his friend's mind. "Go on," Holmes prompted. "What did this figure do?" Pippin swallowed hard, his hands trembling. They slipped into the maestro's tent. "I didn't think much of it at first. Folks come and go, you know. But then I heard a sound, like a muffled cry. I froze. I should have gone to check, but I was scared. I went back to my tent and stayed there. Next thing I knew, the maestro was gone, and everyone was saying he'd vanished during the magic act. Watson frowned, stepping closer. Why didn't you tell anyone, man? You might have saved him. Pippin's eyes filled with tears, smudging the black paint around them. I wanted to, Dr. Watson, I swear. But the next day, I found a note. Under my pillow, it said, "Keep silent, or you'll be next." I didn't know what to do. I've been looking over my shoulder ever since, waiting for that cloaked figure to come for me. Holmes's fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind clearly racing. "This note," he said. "Do you still have it?" Pippin nodded, fumbling in his trunk. He produced a crumpled scrap of paper, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. Holmes took it, his gloved fingers unfolding it with care. The writing was in block letters, scrawled in black ink. "Keep silent or you'll be next." Holmes held the note to the lantern, examining the paper's texture and the ink's consistency. "Cheap paper, likely from a stationer's shop in the East End," he murmured. "The ink has a slight Shin-India ink, perhaps commonly used by clerks or forgers. This was written in haste, but with intent to intimidate." Watson peered over Holmes's shoulder. "Do you think it's genuine? Could it be a prank?" Holmes's eyes flicked to Pippin, who was wringing his hands. "No prank, Watson. The fear in Mr. Pippin's demeanor is real, and the note's placement under his pillow suggests intimate knowledge of the circus's routines. Someone within the troupe, or with access to it, is involved." Pippin's voice cracked. "I don't know who it was, Mr. Holmes, I swear. I've been too scared to sleep properly since every creak, every shadow. I think they're coming for me." Holmes pocketed the note, his expression unreadable. "You did well to tell us, Mr. Pippin. Your silence protected you thus far, but it also shielded the culprit. Now, describe the figure in more detail. Height, build, anything distinctive." Pippin hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Tall, I think. Taller than me, at least. Thin, but not frail." The cloak hid most of their shape, but they moved quick, like they knew the grounds well. And there was a smell, sharp, like medicine. Holmes's eyes sharpened. A chemical odor, similar to what I detected in the mirrored cabinet. Pippin nodded vigorously. "Yes, exactly. I didn't think of it till now, but it was the same. Like something you'd smell in a doctor's office." Watson's medical instincts stirred. "Chloroform, Holmes. It fits. A quick way to subdue someone without a struggle." Holmes nodded, his mind clearly piecing together the puzzle. "Indeed, Watson. The chemical odor in the cabinet, the muffled cry Pippin heard. And now this cloaked figure suggests Vellucci was incapacitated and removed from the tent before the magic act, which served as a convenient distraction. The mirrored cabinet was likely a ruse to make it appear he vanished during the performance. Pippin's face paled beneath his makeup. "You mean someone drugged the maestro and took him? But why? He was a good man, Mr. Holmes. He didn't deserve this." Holmes's gaze softened, though only slightly. Good men often become targets when they stand in the way of greed or power. "Tell me, Mr. Pippin, did Vellucci have enemies within the circus? Anyone who resented his authority?" Pippin shook his head. The maestro was strict, but fair. The performers loved him, mostly, though there was talk. Marco, the acrobat, had been arguing with him lately. Something about money I think. And honor she's sweet, but she was always asking the maestro for more time in the spotlight. I don't think they'd hurt him, though. Holmes's lips twitched, as if amused by Pippin's naivety. Loyalty in a troupe is a fragile thing, Mr. Pippin. We shall speak with Marco and Anna again. For now, you must continue as if nothing has changed. Do not speak of this to anyone, not even your fellow performers. If the culprit learns you've spoken, your fear may become reality. Pippin nodded, his painted face a mask of misery. I'll keep quiet, Mr. Holmes. I just want this to be over. Holmes rose, adjusting his coat. It will be, Mr. Pippin. But first, we must follow the trail this cloaked figure has left. Watson, come. We have work to do. As they stepped out into the night, Watson glanced back at the tent, where Pippin's silhouette hunched against the lantern light. Poor fellow, Watson said. He's terrified. Do you believe his story? Holmes's eyes glinted in the darkness. Every word, Watson. His fear is too raw to be feigned, and the note corroborates his account. The chemical odor ties his sighting to the evidence in the cabinet. We are dealing with a calculated abduction, and the circus is merely the stage for a larger scheme. They walked in silence for a moment, the fog swirling around them. Watson's mind churned with questions. This cloaked figure, he said, do you think is the same person who left the cigarette case with the M initial? Could it really be Moriarty? Holmes's expression darkened. The cigarette case suggests a connection, but we must tread carefully. Moriarty is a spider at the center of a vast web. If he is involved, this is no mere kidnapping, it is a move in a larger game. The circus's travels across Europe would make it an ideal vehicle for smuggling, whether it be contraband, forged currency, or something more sinister. Watson shivered, though not from the cold. Smuggling through a circus. It seems far-fetched. Does it? Holmes countered, his voice sharp. A travelling circus crosses borders with little scrutiny. Its wagons can conceal goods, its performers can carry messages, and its chaos provides cover for illicit dealings. Velusi's refusal to cooperate may have made him a liability. They reached the main tent, its silhouette looming like a sleeping giant. Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the entrance. Tomorrow we must examine the grounds more thoroughly. Pippin's cloaked figure knew the encampment well, which suggests either an insider or someone with intimate access. We must also revisit the mirrored cabinet and trace the chemical odor's source. Watson nodded, though his thoughts were still on Pippin. What about the clown? Will he be safe? Holmes's jaw tightened. For now, his fear will keep him silent. But we must act swiftly. The longer Vellucci remains missing, the greater the danger to the entire troupe. As they turned back toward the city, the circus grounds faded into the fog, a world of secrets and shadows. Watson couldn't shake the image of Pippin's tear-streaked face, nor the chilling possibility that Moriarty's hand was at work. The case was deepening, and with each revelation, the stakes grew higher. The next morning dawned grey and damp, the circus encampment stirring to life with the clatter of props and the chatter of performers. Holmes and Watson returned early, their purpose clear, to follow the threads Pippin's confession had unravelled. Holmes, as always, was a study in focus, his eyes darting over the grounds, as if reading a map only he could see. Watson, ever the loyal companion, kept pace, his revolver tucked discreetly in his coat of precaution. Holmes had insisted upon after the previous night's revelations. Their first stop was the mirrored cabinet, still standing in the main tent, where Vellucci had last been seen. The cabinet, a towering contraption of polished wood and gleaming glass, was designed for the circus's grand illusion, the vanishing act. Holmes knelt beside it, his magnifying glass in hand, examining the scuff marks he had noted earlier. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to a series of faint scratches on the floor. "These marks are not random. They form a pattern, as if something heavy was dragged toward the back of the cabinet. And here," he ran a finger along the cabinet's interior, then sniffed it. "The chemical odor persists. Chloroform, as you suggested, but mixed with something else. Perhaps ether, to prolong the effect." Watson frowned, peering into the cabinet's mirrored depths. But how could someone drag Vellucci out without being seen? The tent was full of spectators. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The answer lies in timing and misdirection. The magic act relies on distraction, flashing lights, music, the flourish of a cape. The audience's attention was on the stage, not the cabinet's base. A trapdoor or hidden panel could have allowed the abductor to remove Vellucci unseen. 2. Test his theory. Holmes tapped the cabinet's floor, listening for hollow sounds. After a moment, he pressed a section of the base, and a small panel clicked open, revealing a narrow compartment. Watson's eyes widened. "Good Lord, Holmes. A secret compartment. Not large enough to hold a man," Holmes said, "but sufficient to conceal tools or a small quantity of chloroform." The abductor prepared in advance, ensuring Vellucci was incapacitated before the act began. Leaving the cabinet, they moved to the area behind the main tent, where Pippin had seen the cloaked figure. The ground was soft from recent rain, preserving a few faint footprints. Holmes crouched, his magnifying glass hovering over the tracks. A man's boot, size 10, with a distinctive wear pattern on the heel. The stride suggests height, corroborating Pippin's description of a tall figure. Watson scanned the surrounding area, noting the proximity to Vellucci's tent. The abductor must have been quick to slip in, subdue Vellucci, and escape all before the performance ended. Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. Speed and familiarity. With the grounds, this was no impulsive act. The cloaked figure had a plan, and Pippin's sighting places them at the scene moments before the vanishing. Their investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Anna Duval, her trapeze costume shimmering in the morning light. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice low. "I heard you were speaking with Pippin last night. Did he tell you anything?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. "He provided useful information, Miss Duval, but I wonder why you were so concerned. Have you seen something yourself?" Anna hesitated, twisting a strand of her hair. "Not exactly. It's just, the troupe is on edge. Pippin's been acting strange, and Marco's been worse. He's been drinking, arguing with everyone. I'm worried the circus will fall apart without..." The maestro, Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Marco's behavior is noted. Tell me, Miss Duval, did you notice anything unusual on the night of Vellucci's disappearance? A stranger, perhaps, or an unfamiliar smell?" Anna shook her head. "I was preparing for my act. I didn't see anything, but I did hear something. A sort of scuffle near the maestro's tent, just before the show started. I thought it was just the stagehands moving props." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. "Thank you, Miss Duval. Your information is valuable. Please continue your rehearsals and speak of this to no one." As Anna hurried away, Watson turned to Holmes. "A scuffle that aligns with Pippin's story. The cloaked figure must have acted just before the performance." "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice low. The pieces are falling into place. The chemical odor, the muffled cry, the footprints all point to a carefully orchestrated abduction. But the question remains, where is Vellucci now, and who stands to gain from his removal? The rest of the day was spent combing the encampment for further clues. Holmes examined Vellucci's tent again, finding a small vial tucked beneath a floorboard. He held it to the light, noting the faint residue inside. Chloroform, as expected. He said, the abductor left little to chance. By evening, they had gathered enough to form a clearer picture. The cloaked figure, likely an insider or someone with detailed knowledge of the circus, had used chloroform to subdue Vellucci, dragging him from his tent to an unknown location. The mirrored cabinet had served as a distraction, allowing the abductor to escape unnoticed. Pippin's fear and the threatening note suggested a larger conspiracy, possibly tied to the criminal syndicate Marco had mentioned, as they prepared to leave the encampment. Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Tomorrow, Watson, we follow the trail beyond the circus. The ledger we found at the tavern mentioned a smuggler named Black Jack. If he is involved, he may lead us to Vellucci and, perhaps, to the true mastermind. Watson nodded, his resolve hardening, and if it's Moriarty, Holmes's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. Then we are playing a game far greater than we anticipated. But I am ready, Watson, and so, I trust, are you. The fog had thickened as they made their way back to Baker Street, the circus fading into the distance like a dream. Yet the mystery remained, its threads weaving through the shadows of London, pulling Holmes and Watson deeper into a web of danger and deception. Chapter 7. A trail of sawdust and secrets. The fog clung to the London streets like a conspirator, wrapping itself around the gas lamps and muffling the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. Sherlock Holmes, his sharp features half hidden beneath the brim of his deerstalker, led Dr. John Watson through the labyrinthine alleys of Whitechapel. The air was thick with the smells of coal smoke, stale beer, and the faint tang of sawdust, a clue that had set Holmes's mind ablaze with purpose. The circus, with its kaleidoscope of colours and secrets, had left a trail, and Holmes was determined to follow it to its source. Watson, bundled in his overcoat against the evening chill, glanced at his friend. Holmes, are you certain this tavern is worth our time? It's a wretched place, even by Whitechapel's standards. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. My dear Watson, the wretchedness of a place is often proportional to the secrets it harbours. The ledger Anna mentioned, the one detailing the circus's supplies, points us to the Rusty Anchor. It is no ordinary public house. It's a nexus for those who trade in the shadows. They turned a corner, and the tavern came into view, its crooked sign swaying in the damp breeze. The Rusty Anchor squatted at the edge of a narrow street, its windows grimy and its door scarred from years of rough use. From within came the raucous din of laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional shout of a drunken dispute. Holmes paused, his gaze sweeping over the building like a general surveying a battlefield. Observe, Watson, he said, pointing to a pile of crates stacked haphazardly near the tavern's side entrance. Sawdust spills from those crates, the same coarse blend used in the circus ring. And note the faint wheel marks in the mud narrow, consistent with the carts used to transport circus equipment. We are on the right trail. Watson nodded, though his hand rested on the reassuring weight of his revolver in his coat pocket. And this Black Jack fellow Anna mentioned, you think he's inside? Almost certainly, Holmes replied, his voice low. Anna's description of him, a man with a scar across his left cheek and a penchant for cheap cigars, matches a known associate of the criminal underworld. Blackjack is no mere smuggler. He's a cog in a larger machine. If Velucci was coerced into smuggling, Blackjack is the enforcer. Come, let us proceed with caution. They pushed through the tavern's door, stepping into a haze of tobacco smoke and the sour stench of spilled ale. The Rusty Anchor was a den of misfits, dock workers, petty thieves, and shifty-eyed men who glanced up from their drinks with suspicion. At the bar, a burly man with a scar slicing across his left cheek was wiping down glasses with a rag that looked dirtier than the counter. His eyes flicked toward Holmes and Watson, narrowing briefly before returning to his task. Holmes strode forward, his air of confidence cutting through the room like a blade. "Good evening," he said, his voice clear and precise. "We seek information regarding certain supplies delivered to Duval's traveling circus. I believe you are the man to speak to, Mr. Blackjack." The barman's hand froze midway, and a hush rippled through the tavern. Conversations died, and several patrons shifted in their seats, hands inching toward concealed weapons. Watson's grip on his revolver tightened, his pulse quickening. Blackjack set down the glass with deliberate slowness, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. "Don't know no circus, and I ain't Blackjack. You've got the wrong man, Mr. Holmes's." Eyes gleamed with the intensity of a predator closing in on its prey. "Indeed. Then, perhaps, you can explain why your cigar case bears the initials BJ, and why the sawdust clinging to your boots matches the blend used in the circus ring. A curious coincidence, wouldn't you say?" The room grew tense, the air thick, with the promise of violence. Blackjack's sneer faltered, and he leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "You're a clever one, ain't you? But clever don't keep you safe in Whitechapel. What do you want?" "Information," Holmes said. Smoothly, "Enrico Vellucci, the ringmaster, has vanished. We know he was involved in your enterprise. Tell us where he is, and who you answer to." Blackjack laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Vellucci, that fool thought he could back out. He's gone, and you'll get nothing from me." Holmes leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried an unmistakable edge. "Refuse, and I shall ensure the authorities take a keen interest in your dealings. I have evidence of your smuggling dates, shipments, and contacts. Speak, or the next visitors to this tavern will be wearing uniforms." Blackjack's eyes darted to the side, where two of his men had risen from their seats, hands resting on knives. Watson stepped forward, his revolver now visible, its barrel catching the dim light. "I'd advise against that," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. The standoff held for a moment, the tension a taut wire ready to snap. Then Blackjack raised a hand, signaling his men to stand down. All right," he muttered. Vellucci was trouble. He was smuggling goods, rare stuff, hidden in the circus wagons. But he got cold feet, said he wouldn't do it no more. My employer didn't take kindly to that, and your employer is." Holmes pressed. Blackjack hesitated, his eyes flickering with fear. "I don't know his name, never met him. Orders come through a middleman. All I know is he's powerful, and he don't like loose ends. Vellucci was taken to teach him a lesson. That's all I'll say." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Where was Vellucci taken? "A warehouse," Blackjack said reluctantly. "Down by the docks, near Wapping." Old place, abandoned. That's where they keep problems. Holmes nodded, stepping back. You've been most helpful, Watson. We have what we need. As they turned to leave, Blackjack called after them, his voice laced with menace. You're digging your own grave, detective. You don't know what you're up against. Holmes didn't turn back, but his lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. I rather think I do. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the street in a grey shroud. Watson exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. Holmes, that was too close. Do you believe him about this employer? Partially, Holmes replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. Blackjack is a pawn, but his fear was genuine. This warehouse is our next step, but we must be cautious. The man behind this, whether Moriarty or another, will not take kindly to our interference. They made their way toward the docks, the city's pulse fading into the rhythmic lap of the Thames against the wharves. The warehouse district was a maze of crumbling buildings, their silhouettes looming like silent sentinels in the fog. Holmes's pace quickened, his senses attuned to every sound, the creak of a loose board, the scuttle of rats, the distant shout of a dockworker. The warehouse Blackjack had described was a dilapidated structure, its windows boarded and its walls streaked with grime. Holmes paused at the entrance, examining the ground. Fresh footprints, he murmured, crouching to inspect the mud. Several men coming and going, and here more sawdust. We are close, Watson. Drawing his revolver, Watson followed Holmes as they slipped through a side door, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp wood and something sharper blood. Perhaps, or the chemical temps Holmes had noted in Velusi's cabinet. The warehouse was a cavernous space, its floor littered with broken crates and tangled ropes. In the center stood a pile of circus prop trapeze bars, a painted backdrop, and a large mirrored cabinet identical to the one used in Velusi's Vanishing Act. Holmes approached the cabinet, his fingers tracing its edges. This is no coincidence, he said. This cabinet was moved here after the performance. See the drag marks? Someone went to great lengths to conceal their work. Watson peered into the gloom, his revolver steady. Do you think Velucci is here? Before Holmes could answer, a shadow moved in the corner of the warehouse. A figure darted behind a stack of crates, the glint of a blade catching the faint light. Holmes's hand shot up, signaling Watson to hold his fire. Show yourself, Holmes called, his voice echoing in the empty space. The figure stepped forward, revealing a wiry man with a pockmarked face and a knife in hand. You're the detective, he spat. Blackjack warned us you'd come sniffing. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And you are. Doesn't matter, the man snarled. You're in over your head. Leave, or you'll end up like Velucci. Watson raised his revolver, but Holmes placed a hand on his arm. There's no need for that, Watson. Our friend here is merely a messenger. Tell your employer that Sherlock Holmes is not so easily deterred. Where is Velucci? The man laughed, a hollow sound. You think you can scare me? Velucci's gone, and you'll be next if you don't back off. Holmes stepped closer, his presence commanding despite his calm demeanor. You mistake me for a man who makes idle threats. Tell me where Velucci is, or I shall ensure your next conversation is with Scotland Yard. The man hesitated, his bravado faltering. All right, he said finally. He's not here. They moved him somewhere safe. I don't know where. I just guard the goods. Holmes's gaze flicked to the crates behind the man. "The goods," he said thoughtfully. "Show me." Reluctantly, the man led them to a crate tucked in the corner. Holmes pried it open, revealing a cache of small, tightly wrapped packages. He unwrapped one, revealing a bundle of forged banknotes, their ink still fresh. "Counterfeit currency," Holmes said, his voice grim. "This is what Vellucci was smuggling, or refusing to smuggle." Watson stared at the notes, his mind reeling. "This is a fortune, Holmes. Enough to destabilize the economy if it spreads." "Precisely," Holmes said. "And it explains why Vellucci was taken. He was a liability. But where is he now?" The man shifted nervously. "I told you, I don't know. They move him around. All I know is the boss wants this operation quiet, and you're making noise." Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden understanding. "The boss," he said softly. "A man of considerable intellect, no doubt. A man who operates through proxies, never showing his face. Tell me, does he go by the name Moriarty?" The man's face paled, and he took a step back. "I don't know no Moriarty. I just follow orders." Holmes nodded, as if the man's fear confirmed his suspicions. "Very well, Watson, bind this man. He'll be of use to Lestrade." As Watson secured the man's wrists with a length of rope from the warehouse, Holmes examined the forged notes further. "These are expertly done," he said. "The work of a master forger, likely based in London. We must find Vellucci before this operation moves again." They left the warehouse, the bound man in tow, and stepped back into the fog. The city seemed to close in around them, its secrets buried in the mist. Holmes's mind was a whirlwind of deductions, each clue a thread in the tapestry of the case. Black Jack, the warehouse, the forged currency all pointed to a larger scheme, one orchestrated by a mind as brilliant as his own. "Watson," Holmes said as they hailed a hansom cab, "we are dealing with a spider at the center of a vast web. Vellucci is alive, I am certain of it, but his location remains elusive. We must return to the circus and prepare for the next move." Watson nodded, his resolve strengthened by Holmes's certainty. "What's our next step?" Holmes's eyes glinted in the gaslight. "We stage a trap. If the spider wishes to protect his web, he will come to us. And when he does, we shall be ready." The cab rattled off into the night, carrying them back toward the circus grounds. The trail of sawdust and secrets had led them deep into the heart of a criminal empire, and Holmes knew that the true battle was only beginning. The following morning, the circus grounds were abuzz with activity. Performers rehearsed their acts, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath the surface. Holmes and Watson moved among them, their presence a quiet reassurance to Anna and the others. Holmes had instructed Anna to spread a rumor among the troupe. A valuable artifact, supposedly hidden in Vellucci's tent, was about to be uncovered. The bait was set, and Holmes was confident it would draw the attention of Black Jack's employer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the tents, Holmes and Watson took their positions. Holmes had chosen a vantage point atop a stack of crates, his keen eyes scanning the grounds. Watson, stationed near Vellucci's tent, kept his revolver at the ready. His nerves taut with anticipation, the circus performance began, the music and laughter a stark contrast to the tension coiled within Holmes and Watson. The crowd roared as Anna swung gracefully on her trapeze, her movements a dance of defiance against the fear that had gripped the troupe. Holmes watched, his mind calculating every possible angle of attack. Then, in the flicker of torchlight, He saw it, a cloaked figure slipping through the shadows near the main tent. Holmes signaled to Watson, who moved silently to intercept. The figure paused, sensing danger, and then bolted toward the tent's entrance. Holmes leaped from his perch, his long legs carrying him across the grounds with startling speed. "Stop!" Watson shouted, his revolver raised. The figure spun, a knife flashing in their hand, but Holmes was already upon them. With a swift motion, he disarmed the intruder, pinning their arm behind their back. The hood fell away, revealing a face Watson didn't recognize, a young man with sharp features and a desperate glint in his eyes. "Who sent you?" Holmes demanded, his grip unyielding. The man struggled, but Holmes's strength was surprising. For his lean frame, "I don't know," the man gasped. "I was paid to steal something, some artifact. That's all I know." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Paid by whom?" The man shook his head, his breath ragged. "A man in a mask. He didn't give a name. Said to come here tonight, take the artifact, and leave it at a drop point by the river." Holmes released the man, who collapsed to the ground, trembling. "Watson, secure him. This is another pawn, but he's given us a new, led the river drop point." As Watson bound the intruder, Holmes's mind raced. The masked man, the forged currency, the abducted ringmaster, all were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a single orchestrator. Moriarty's shadow loomed larger with every clue. But Holmes knew he needed more than suspicion to bring down his nemesis. The night wore on, the circus performance reaching its climax. Anna descended from her trapeze to thunderous applause, her smile masking the fear she still carried. Holmes and Watson escorted their prisoner to a nearby police station, where Inspector Lestrade was waiting, his expression a mix of exasperation and grudging respect. "Another one for the cells, Holmes?" Lestrade asked, eyeing the bound man. "What's this about?" "A smuggling ring, Inspector," Holmes replied. "Counterfeit currency, a kidnapped ringmaster, and a mastermind who remains one step ahead. I need you to watch the dock, specifically a drop point near Wapping. Our quarry is moving, and we must be ready." Lestrade sighed, rubbing his temples. "You'll be the death of me, Holmes, but I'll have my men on it." As they left the station, Watson turned to Holmes, his expression troubled. "Holmes, this is bigger than we thought. If Moriarty is behind this, how do we stop him?" Holmes's gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon where the city met the sky. "By following the trail, Watson, every web has a center, and every spider a weakness. We shall find Vellucci, and we shall find Moriarty. The game is afoot." The days that followed were a blur of investigation and subterfuge. Holmes and Watson scoured the docks, interrogating informants and tracking shipments. The drop point yielded little, a crate of forged notes, left abandoned, but it confirmed the operation's scale. Holmes deduced that the syndicate was preparing to move its base, likely taking Vellucci with them. One evening, as they sat in their lodgings at 2-1B Baker Street, Holmes spread a map of London across the table, his fingers tracing the Thames. "The river is their artery," he said. "They move goods and people by water. The warehouse was a temporary hold, but Vellucci is likely being kept on a ship or a barge, ready to be spirited away." Watson frowned, studying the map. "But where, Holmes? The Thames is vast, and there are countless vessels." Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden clarity. "Not countless, Watson. The circus's schedule included performances in coastal towns, Dover, Brighton, Margate. A ship bound for one of those ports would be ideal for smuggling. We must focus our efforts on the docks near Limehouse, where maritime traffic is heaviest. The next morning, they set out for Limehouse, blending into the crowds of sailors and merchants. The docks were a chaotic symphony of creaking ropes, shouting stevedores, and the groan of ships at anchor. Holmes's keen eyes scanned the vessels, searching for any sign of the circus's influence or dust, perhaps, or the bright colors of a performer's costume near the edge of the dock. They found it, a small, weathered schooner with a faded circus emblem painted on its hull. Holmes approached, his demeanor casual but his senses alert. A sailor lounged on the deck, smoking a pipe, but his eyes followed Holmes with suspicion. "Good day," Holmes said, tipping his hat. "I'm seeking passage for a colleague. Might this vessel be available?" The sailor grunted, his gaze narrowing. "This ain't no passenger ship. Move along." Holmes smiled thinly. "A pity. I had heard this ship was connected to traveling circus. A friend of mine, Enrico Vellucci, recommended it." The sailor's pipe froze halfway to his mouth, and Holmes knew he had struck a nerve. Before the man could react, Holmes stepped onto the gangplank, his movements swift and purposeful. "Watson, with me," he called. The sailor lunged, drawing a knife, but Watson was faster, his revolver pressed against the man's chest. "Don't," Watson said, his voice calm but firm. Holmes searched the ship, his eyes darting over every detail: the ropes, the crates, the faint smell of sawdust in the hold. Below deck, he found a locked cabin, its door reinforced with iron. With a hairpin from his pocket, Holmes picked the lock, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, bound and gagged, was Enrico Vellucci. The ringmaster's eyes widened at the sight of Holmes, his muffled cries a mix of relief and desperation. Holmes cut his bonds, helping him to his feet. "Mr. Vellucci," he said, "you've caused quite a stir." Vellucci's voice was hoarse, his face pale. "They took me. Said I'd be killed if I didn't cooperate." "It's bigger than you know, Mr. Holmes. They're planning something terrible." Holmes's expression darkened. "Tell me everything." As Vellucci recounted his ordeal, blackmail, threats, and a shadowy figure pulling the strings, mind pieced together the final threads of the case. The schooner was a temporary prison, but the true operation was elsewhere, orchestrated by a mind that thrived on chaos. They escorted Vellucci off the ship, Watson keeping the sailor at bay. As they reached the dock, a shout rang out. A group of armed men emerged from the shadows. Their leader, a tall figure in a black coat. Holmes's eyes locked onto him, recognizing the cold intelligence in his gaze. "Moriarty," Holmes said, his voice a low challenge. The man smiled, a predator's grin. "Well done, Holmes, but you're too late. The game has only begun." Before Holmes could respond, the men scattered, disappearing into the fog. Moriarty's laughter echoed in their wake, a chilling promise of future battles. Holmes turned. To Watson, his expression resolute. "We have Vellucci, but the war is far from over. Come, Watson. We return to the circus and to the next move in this deadly game." The trail of sawdust and secrets had led them to the heart of the conspiracy. But Holmes knew that Moriarty's shadow would not be so easily dispelled. The circus, for now, was safe, but the city of London remained a chessboard, and the next move belonged to the mastermind. Chapter 8. The Midnight Intruder. The night was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked grass and the distant hum of London's restless pulse. The circus grounds, sprawled across a muddy field on the city's outskirts, lay quiet under a shroud of mist. The vibrant chaos of the day-laughter music, the crack of whips, and the roar of caged beasts had faded into an eerie stillness. Only the occasional creak of a tent pole or the soft snort of a horse broke the silence. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson crouched behind a stack of crates near the performers' tents, their breaths shallow, their eyes fixed on the shadowed the expanse of the encampment. Holmes had insisted on the stakeout, his mind alight with the threads of the case. The disappearance of Maestro Enrico Vellucci, the cryptic note in his tent, the chemical odor in the mirrored cabinet, and the whispered fears of a curse among the troupe pointed to a calculated act, not a theatrical flourish. The cigarette case with the initial M had stirred Holmes's suspicions of a larger scheme, one possibly orchestrated by his nemesis, Professor Moriarty. Watson, ever the loyal companion, had agreed to the plan despite the late hour and the chill that seeped through his coat. The tavern lead, connecting Vellucci to a smuggler named Blackjack, had brought them here, to this moment, waiting for a shadow to move. The circus grounds were a labyrinth of canvas and rope, illuminated faintly by a half-moon struggling through the clouds. The main tent loomed in the distance, its peaked roof a silhouette against the sky. Smaller tents, housing performers and crew, dotted the perimeter, their guy ropes taut against the wind. The animal cages, lined along the northern edge, gave off a faint musk, and the occasional low growl reminded Watson of the lions sleeping fitfully within. Holmes, his lean frame coiled like a spring, scanned the scene with hawk-like intensity. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, darted from the darkened pathways to the flickering lanterns hung at intervals. "Patience, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible. "Our quarry will reveal themselves." The guilty always return to the scene of their crime, driven by fear or arrogance. Watson shifted, his knees aching from the damp ground. "And if they don't, we could be here all night, Holmes. This mud is ruining my trousers." Holmes's lips twitched, a rare flicker of amusement. "Consider it a sacrifice to the pursuit of truth. Besides, your trousers have endured worse." Watson grunted but said no more. He trusted Holmes's instincts, honed by years of unraveling mysteries that baffled Scotland Yard. The circus case, however, felt different, darker, more theatrical, as if the very stage of the investigation mocked them. The performer's fear, the cryptic clues, the shadow of Moriarty, all wove a tapestry of intrigue that Watson could feel tightening round them. A faint rustle broke the silence, like the scuff of a boot on gravel. Holmes's hand shot up, signaling Watson to still. The sound came from the direction of Vellucci's tent, a gaudy structure adorned with faded stars and a banner proclaiming Maestro of Marbles. The tent's entrance flap hung slightly, ajar, swaying in the breeze. Watson's heart quickened as he strained to see through the mist. A shadow moved, slight, deliberate, cloaked in darkness. It paused at the tent's entrance, then slipped inside with the grace of a cat. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "There," he whispered, "our intruder." Watson's hand went to the revolver in his coat pocket, its weight a small comfort. "Shall we confront them?" "Not yet," Holmes replied, his voice steady. "We observe. Knowledge is our weapon." They crept forward, keeping to the shadows of the crates and wagons. The ground was slick, forcing Watson to move with care to avoid slipping. Holmes, as always, seemed untouched by the terrain, his movements fluid and silent. They reached the side of Vellucci's tent, pressing themselves against the canvas. Inside, the faint glow of a lantern cast jagged shadows on the fabric, revealing the silhouette of the intruder rifling through a trunk. Holmes gestured for Watson to circle around to the tent's rear. where a secondary entrance might offer a better vantage. Watson nodded, his pulse steady despite the tension. Years of following Holmes into danger had taught him to trust his friend's lead, even when the path seemed perilous. He moved cautiously, avoiding the guy ropes that crisscrossed the ground like tripwires. The mist thickened, cloaking him in its damp embrace, and he shivered as a droplet slid down his neck at the rear of the tent. Watson found a small flap, likely used for quick exits during performances. He crouched low, peering inside. The intruder was still at the trunk, their back to him, cloaked in a long dark coat that obscured their form. The lantern's light caught the glint of something metallica, knife, perhaps, or a tool. Watson tightened his grip on the revolver, ready to act if needed. Suddenly, the intruder froze, as if sensing a presence. Watson held his breath, his body tense. The figure turned, their face hidden by a scarf wrapped tightly around the lower half. Only their eyes were visible, sharp and alert, scanning the tent's interior. Watson ducked back, praying the shadows concealed him. The intruder resumed their search, pulling papers and small objects from the trunk with hurried movements. Holmes appeared at Watson Babel, his whisper sharp. "Watson, now." Watson sprang into action, pushing through the flap with his revolver. "Drawn. Stop where you are," he barked, his voice cutting through the silence. The intruder spun, a knife flashing in their hand. With a swift motion, they lunged at Watson, the blade gleaming in the lantern light. Watson dodged, but the attacker was fast, their movements trained and precise. The knife slashed through the air, missing Watson's arm by inches. He stumbled back, his foot catching on a rope, and fell hard against a wooden crate. Holmes was there in an instant, his cane a blur as he struck the intruder's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground, and the assailant let out a muffled curse. Holmes seized the moment, grabbing the intruder's arm and twisting it behind their back. But the figure was strong, wrenching free with a violent twist and shoving Holmes into the tent's center pole. The structure shook, and the lantern swung wildly, casting chaotic shadows. Watson scrambled to his feet, aiming his revolver. "Stop, or I'll shoot." The intruder hesitated, their eyes darting between Watson and Holmes. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, they dove for the tent flap, vanishing into the night. Holmes was on their heels, but the mist swallowed the figure before he could close the distance. Watson joined him, panting, his heart pounding. "Blast." "It," Watson muttered, holstering his revolver. "They're gone." Holmes knelt, examining the ground where the intruder had stood. His fingers brushed over a small object glinting in the mudder coin, stamped with a circus emblem of a lion and a ring of stars. He held it up to the lantern light, his expression grim. "What is it?" Watson asked, leaning closer. "A token," Holmes said, his voice low. "Used by a secret society within the circus trade. I've seen its like before, in cases involving smugglers and spies. This is no mere thief, Watson." Watson frowned, catching his breath. "One of Moriarty's men, perhaps." Holmes pocketed the coin, his mind already racing. "Or someone closer to the circus itself. The emblem suggests a connection to the troupe, but the skill of that attacker speaks of professional training." They searched the tent, finding the trunk's contents in disarray costumes, letters, and trinkets scattered across the floor. Among them was a small ledger, its pages filled with coded entries. Holmes flipped through it, his eyes narrowing. "Smuggling. Records," he said. Vellucci was indeed involved, willingly or not. This ledger links him to black, Jack, and others. Our intruder was likely searching for it. Watson rubbed his aching shoulder, bruised from the fall. But why? If Lucy's gone, what use is it now? To destroy evidence, Holmes replied, or to find leverage. The syndicate behind this will not let their secrets be exposed. We must act quickly, Watson. The circus is a stage, and we are not the only players. They left the tent, stepping back into the misty night. The circus grounds seemed to watch them, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Watson felt a chill that had little to do with the cold. The case was growing darker, and the spectre of Moriarty loomed larger with every step. Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the distant city lights. "Tomorrow we follow the coin," he said. "It will lead us to the heart of this mystery, or to the jaws of a trap." Watson nodded, his resolve firm despite the danger. "To Baker Street, then." Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. First, we secure the ledger, then we prepare for the next act." They moved off into the night, the circus fading behind them, its secrets still buried in the shadows. Chapter 9. The Hidden Passage. The fog clung to the outskirts of London like a shroud, wrapping the circus grounds in a damp, ghostly haze. Sherlock Holmes stood at the edge of the main tent, his sharp eyes scanning the trampled grass and sawdust-strewn paths. The air carried the faint scent of canvas, animal musk, and something sharper, perhaps the lingering trace of the chemical odor he had detected in the mirrored cabinet days earlier. Beside him, Dr. John Watson adjusted his coat, his breath visible in the chill morning air. The circus was quiet now, its vibrant chaos subdued as the performers rested after a late-night show. But for Holmes, the stillness was a canvas, ready to reveal its secrets. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low but commanding, "observe the ground near the stage. The earth is uneven, as though it has been disturbed recently, not by the usual tread of performers or spectators, but by something more deliberate." Watson crouched, peering at the patch of dirt Holmes indicated. The ground was indeed uneven, with faint ridges that suggested something heavy had been dragged across it. A trapdoor, perhaps. Watson ventured, glancing up at his friend. Holmes's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. Precisely, a trapdoor, or something akin to it. The circus is a place of illusions, Watson, and illusions often conceal practical truths. Let us investigate. They moved toward the main tent, its red and white stripes faded under the grey sky. Inside, the vast space was eerily silent, the rows of empty benches stretching into the shadows. The stage, a wooden platform raised slightly above the ground, was the heart of the circus's performances, where Maestro Enrico Vellucci had last been seen before his vanishing act. Holmes knelt beside the stage, his long fingers tracing the edges of the planks. His eyes narrowed as he pressed against a section of wood that gave a faint, hollow creak. "Here," he said, producing a small tool from his Paquita thin metal pick, one of many instruments he carried for such occasions. With deft movements, he pried at the seam, revealing a concealed hinge. The plank lifted, exposing a trapdoor no larger than a man's shoulders, its edges cunningly disguised to blend with the stage's surface. Watson let out a low whistle. "A hidden passage, right under the stage. How did you know?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery. The scuff marks near the mirrored cabinet suggested something was dragged, not carried. The chemical odor hinted at a struggle, and the circus's transient nature makes it an ideal cover for hidden roots. A trapdoor was the logical conclusion. He lifted the trapdoor fully, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. A rickety wooden ladder was bolted to the side, its rungs worn but sturdy. Holmes lit a small lantern he had retrieved from his satchel, its flame casting flickering shadows on the dirt walls below. "Come, Watson, we descend into the unknown." Watson hesitated, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver in his coat pocket. "Shouldn't we inform the police, or at least Anna Duval? If Felucci is down there, time is our enemy." "Watson," Holmes interrupted, already placing a foot on the ladder. "If Felucci is alive, every moment we delay risks his safety. And if Moriarty's hand is in this, as I suspect, we cannot afford to tip our own. Follow me, and keep your wits about you." The descent was cramped and precarious, the ladder creaking under their weight. The air grew colder and damper as they descended, the scent of earth and decay replacing the circus's lively aromas. At the bottom, the shaft opened into a low, narrow tunnel, its walls reinforced with wooden beams. The lantern's light revealed a rough-hewn passage stretching into the distance, its floor marked with faint footprints and drag marks. Holmes crouched, examining the tracks. Two sets of footprints, one heavy, likely a man's boots, and another lighter. Perhaps Felucci's. The drag marks suggest he was unconscious or restrained. And here he pointed to a small, dark stain on the ground. Blood, not enough to suggest a fatal wound, but enough to confirm a struggle. Watson's jaw tightened. Poor devil. If he's still alive, he's in a bad way. Holmes nodded, his expression grim. Alive, but not for long if we do not act swiftly. The tunnel likely leads to a secondary location, a place where Felucci could be held without drawing attention. We must follow it. The tunnel wound beneath the circus grounds, its path twisting and turning like the coils of a serpent. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of mold and something metallic. Holmes moved with purpose, his lantern casting long shadows that danced on the walls. Watson followed, his revolver now in hand, his senses alert for any sound beyond the drip of water or the scuttle of unseen creatures. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel widened into a small chamber, its walls lined with crates and barrels. Holmes paused, holding up a hand to signal silence. He knelt beside one of the crates, prying it open with his pick. Inside were bundles of paper, their edges crisp and new. Holmes lifted one, his eyes narrowing as he examined it under the lantern's light. "Forged banknotes," he said softly, "exquisitely done. This is no petty operation, Watson. These notes are meant to pass undetected in major cities across Europe. The circus, with its constant travel, would be the perfect vehicle for distribution." Watson's eyes widened. "You think Felucci was involved?" "Not willingly," Holmes replied. "His refusal to cooperate likely led to his abduction. The question is, who is orchestrating this? Blackjack, the smuggler we learned of at the tavern, is merely a cog. The true mastermind remains hidden." As Holmes spoke, a faint sound echoed from the tunnel ahead, a low, scraping noise like metal against stone. Watson gripped his revolver, his heart pounding. Holmes extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness, and motioned for Watson to follow. They moved silently, guided only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through cracks in the earth above. The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the first. In the center stood a heavy wooden door, its surface scarred and bolted. Holmes pressed his ear against it, listening intently. From the other side came muffled voices, too indistinct to make out words, but unmistakably urgent. Holmes tested the door, finding it locked. "Watson," he whispered, Your revolver may be needed, but only as a last resort. We must know what lies beyond before we act. Using his pick, Holmes worked at the lock, his movements precise despite the darkness. The mechanism clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room. Inside, Maestro Enrico Vellucci sat bound to a chair, his face bruised and his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Two men stood guard, their backs to the door, engrossed in a heated argument. Holmes signaled for Watson to remain in the shadows. He slipped into the room, moving like a spectre, and positioned himself behind a stack of crates. From his vantage point, he could see Vellucci's expression, a mixture of defiance and despair. The ringmaster's costume was torn, a blood-stained sleeve confirming the traces Holmes had found in the tunnel. One of the guards, a burly man with a scarred face, growled at his companion. The boss won't wait forever. If Vellucci doesn't talk, we're to finish him and move the goods tonight. The second guard, slighter and nervous, shook his head. Blackjack said to wait for orders. If we act without his say, we're as good as dead. Holmes's eyes flickered with recognition. Blackjack's name confirmed the connection to the smuggler from the tavern, but the mention of the boss suggested a higher authority, perhaps Moriarty himself. Holmes edged closer, his mind racing to formulate a plan. A direct confrontation was risky. The guards were armed, and Vellucci's condition suggested he could not withstand further violence. Watson, Holmes whispered, barely audible, create a distraction. Something subtle, but enough to draw their attention. Watson nodded, retreating into the tunnel. Moments later, a sharp clatter echoed through the chamber, as though a crate had been knocked over. The guards spun toward the sound, their hands on their weapons. Holmes seized the moment, slipping behind the burly guard and delivering a precise blow to the back of his neck. The man crumpled silently, caught by Holmes before he hit the ground. The second guard turned, his eyes wide with alarm, but Watson was already upon him, his revolver raised. "Don't move," Watson said, his voice steady. The guard froze, his hands trembling as he raised them. Holmes quickly untied Vellucci, who gasped with relief but could barely stand. "Mr. Holmes," he rasped, "I knew. Someone would come." "Not now, Maestro," Holmes said, supporting him. "We must leave before more of Blackjack's men arrive." They retraced their steps through the tunnel, Vellucci leaning heavily. On Watson, the ringmaster's breathing was laboured, his injuries more severe than they had appeared. Holmes kept his senses alert, aware that the guard's absence would soon be noticed. The crates of forged banknotes remained in the chamber, evidence that would need to be secured later. As they neared the trapdoor, a distant shout echoed through the tunnel. Holmes's jaw tightened. "They've discovered the guards. Watson, we must move quickly." They climbed the ladder, emerging into the main tent just as the first rays of dawn pierced the fog. Holmes concealed the trapdoor, ensuring it would not be easily found. Vellucci collapsed onto the stage, his strength spent. Watson knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "He's weak, Holmes," Watson said. "He needs a doctor." Holmes nodded, his mind already turning to the next steps. "We'll take him to a safe place, perhaps Anna Duval's lodgings, but we cannot rest yet. Blackjack and his master will know we've interfered. The circus is no longer safe." They carried Vellucci to a nearby wagon, concealing him under a blanket as they drove through the waking streets of London. Holmes's thoughts were a whirlwind of deduction. The tunnel, the forged banknotes, and Vellucci's abduction all pointed to a larger scheme. one that bore the hallmarks of Professor Moriarty's meticulous planning. But why target a circus? The answer, Holmes suspected, lay in its mobility, its ability to cross borders without suspicion at Anna's lodgings. A small room above a baker's shop, they laid Vellucci on a cot. Anna, pale with worry, rushed to his side. "Enrico, what have they done to you?" "He'll live," Holmes said, his tone clipped but reassuring. "But he must remain hidden. The men who took him are part of a larger operation, and they will not hesitate to kill to protect it." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'll care for him. But Mr. Holmes, what happens now?" Holmes paced the small room, his silhouette sharp against the morning light. "We have struck a blow against their operation, but the head of the snake remains. We must draw out the mastermind Black Jack's employer. I suspect he is none other than Professor Moriarty, though I lack definitive proof. To catch him, we must set a trap of our own." Watson frowned. "A trap? With what bait?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity. "The circus itself. We will stage a performance, one that promises something irresistible to our enemy. A rare artifact, perhaps, or a rumor of Vellucci's return. They will come, and when they do, we will be ready." As Anna tended to Vellucci, Holmes and Watson stepped outside, the city stirring around them. The circus grounds lay just beyond the horizon, a place of wonder now tainted by secrets. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling into the air like a question mark. The hidden passage had revealed much, but the true terror, the shadow of Moriarty's still loomed. The game was afoot, and Holmes knew it would demand every ounce of his intellect to bring it to a close. The day passed in a flurry of preparations. Holmes sent word to Inspector Lestrade, requesting discreet police presence near the circus grounds. He instructed Anna to spread rumors among the performers of a valuable artifact hidden within the circus, a relic Vellucci had supposedly guarded. The rumor was vague enough to intrigue, specific enough to draw attention. Holmes knew Black Jack's. Men would hear of it, and if Moriarty was involved, he would not resist the lure. By evening, the circus was alive with activity, the performers unaware of the trap being set. Holmes and Watson took positions in the shadows, watching the crowd for any sign of Black Jack or his men. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of popcorn and sawdust mingling with the tension of the unknown. As the performance began, Holmes's eyes scanned the audience. A cloaked figure slipped into the back row, their face obscured. Holmes's pulse quickened. "Watson," he whispered, "there is our quarry. Be ready." The show reached its climax, the trapeze artists soaring above the crowd. Anna, performing in Vellucci's place, executed a daring leap, her movements flawless despite her fear. The cloaked figure rose, moving toward the stage. Holmes followed, his steps silent, his mind sharp with purpose. The figure reached the edge of the stage, their hand reaching for something beneath a bench. Holmes struck, seizing their wrist and pulling back the cloak. The face revealed was not Moriarty's, but Black Jack's, his eyes wide with shock. "Holmes." He spat, struggling to free himself. "You'll regret this." "Where is your master?" Holmes demanded, his grip unyielding. "Speak, or the police will have you." Black Jack sneered. "You think you've won? The boss is always one step ahead. You'll never catch him." Before Holmes could press further, a commotion erupted at the tent's entrance. Lestrade's men stormed in, apprehending two of Black Jack's accomplices. The smuggler cursed, realizing the trap had closed around him. Holmes handed him to Lestrade, his expression grim. "Vellucci is safe," Holmes said to Lestrade, "but the true mastermind remains at large. The forged banknotes in the tunnel must be secured, and the circus protected." Lestrade nodded, his face a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You've done it again, Holmes. But this Moriarty fellow, if he's as clever as you say, how do we catch him?" Holmes's eyes darkened. "We follow the trail, Inspector, to Reichenbach, if necessary." As the police led Blackjack away, Holmes and Watson returned to Anna's lodgings. Vellucci was awake, his strength slowly returning. He recounted his ordeal, how Blackjack's men had drugged him during the magic act, dragged him through the tunnel, and imprisoned him in the warehouse. He had refused to cooperate with their scheme, knowing it would ruin the circus he loved. "You've saved us, Mr. Holmes," Vellucci said, his voice weak but sincere. "The circus is my life. I'll make it right, I swear." Holmes nodded, his thoughts already elsewhere. The hidden passage had been the key, but it was only one piece of a larger puzzle. Moriarty's shadow stretched far, and Holmes knew their next encounter would be their most dangerous yet. The night ended with the circus grounds quiet once more, the performers unaware of how close they had come to ruin. Holmes and Watson walked back to Baker Street, the fog curling around them like a living thing. The hidden passage had revealed its secrets, but the true terror the mind of Moriarty remained elusive. For now, the circus was safe, but Holmes knew the final act was yet to come. Chapter 10. The terror unveiled. The fog clung to the outskirts of London like a conspirator, shrouding the circus grounds in a veil of damp, grey uncertainty. Sherlock Holmes, his keen eyes piercing through the mist, stood at the edge of the encampment, his silhouette sharp against the dim glow of gas lamps. Dr. John Watson, ever his steadfast companion, adjusted his coat against the evening chill, his breath visible in the air. The circus, once a vibrant tapestry of colour and sound, now seemed to hunker down under the weight of its own secrets, its tents sagging like weary sentinels. Holmes's investigation had brought them to this pivotal moment. The discovery of the underground tunnel beneath the main tent had confirmed his suspicions. Maestro Enrico Beju, the vanished ringmaster, had not disappeared by choice or theatrical flourish, but had been forcibly taken. The traces of blood and the torn fragment of Vellucci's costume in the tunnel were undeniable proof of foul play. Now Holmes's mind churned with the precision of a well-oiled machine, piecing together the threads of the case threads that led inexorably to a shadowy warehouse on the fringes of the city, where he believed Vellucci was being held. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low but firm, "we must proceed with utmost caution. The syndicate we pursue is no ordinary band of ruffians. Their reach extends far beyond this circus, and their purpose is as audacious as it is sinister." Watson nodded, his hand instinctively resting on the revolver in his coat pocket. "Do you truly believe Moriarty is behind this, Holmes? It seems a grand scheme for a mere circus." Holmes's lips curled into a faint, mirthless smile. "The circus, my dear Watson, is but a stager masquerade for a far greater enterprise. Hand is unmistakable. The monogrammed cigarette case, the rare coin, the precision of the abduction all point to a mind that revels in complexity and control. We are not merely rescuing a ringmaster, we are dismantling a cog in Moriarty's machine." The two men set out, leaving the circus grounds behind and navigating through the labyrinthine streets of London's industrial underbelly. The fog thickened as they approached the river, where derelict warehouses loomed like forgotten giants. Their destination was a squat brick structure, its windows boarded and its walls streaked with grime. The air carried the faint stench of oil and decay, and the distant lapping of the Thames was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Holmes paused at the warehouse's perimeter, his eyes scanning the structure for signs of life. A flicker of light escaped through a crack in one of the boarded windows, betraying the presence of occupants. He motioned for Watson to follow, and they crept along the wall, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. At a rusted side door, Holmes produced a set of lockpicks, his fingers working with the dexterity of a surgeon. Within moments, the lock yielded with a soft click. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of shadows, its vast interior cluttered with crates and discarded machinery. A faint glow emanated from the far end, where a single lantern hung from a beam, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. Holmes's eyes darted to a series of footprints in the dust, leading toward a makeshift partition of wooden panels. He gestured for Watson to stay close, and they moved silently, their senses attuned to the slightest sound. As they neared the partition, a low murmur of voices became audible, gruff, urgent tones that suggested a heated discussion. Holmes pressed himself against the wall, peering through a narrow gap between the panels. Beyond, he saw three figures, two burly men, their faces hardened by years of rough living, and a third slumped in a chair, his wrists bound. Even in the dim light, Holmes recognized the distinctive profile of Enrico Vellucci, his once broad demeanor replaced by exhaustion and fear. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, was speaking. "He's not talking, Jem. Says he don't know nothing about the plates. We've been at him for days, and he's stubborn as a mule." The second guard, Jem, spat on the floor. "Boss won't like that. We need those plates, or the whole operation's sunk. If Vellucci don't spill soon, we'll have to make an example of him." Holmes's mind raced. Plates likely printing plates for forged currency. Vellucci's refusal to cooperate explained his abduction. The circus, with its constant movement across cities and borders, was the perfect vehicle for distributing counterfeit money hidden in plain sight among the props and costumes. Moriarty's genius lay in his ability to turn the mundane into a weapon, and the circus was his latest gambit. Holmes whispered to Watson, "We must act swiftly. Vellucci is alive, but his captors grow impatient. If we are to save him and disrupt this scheme, we must incapacitate the guards without alerting others who may be nearby." Watson's jaw tightened. "What's the plan, Holmes?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with calculation, distraction and precision. "You will create a diversion at the far end of the warehouse, something to draw their attention. I will approach from the shadows and subdue them. Be ready to assist Vellucci once the guards are neutralized." Watson nodded, his military instincts kicking in. He slipped away, moving carefully among the crates until he reached a pile of discarded metal pipes. With a deliberate motion, he nudged the pile, sending a cascade of pipes clattering to the floor. The noise echoed through the warehouse, sharp and startling. The guards spun toward the sound, their hands reaching for weapons. "What the devil was that?" Scarface growled, drawing a pistol. "Check it out," Jem ordered, his own knife gleaming in the lantern light. "I'll stay with the prisoner." As Scarface moved toward the noise, Holmes seized his chance. He glided through the shadows, his movements as silent as a spectre. Approaching Jem from behind, He struck with precision, delivering a swift blow to the base of the man's skull. Jem crumpled without a sound, his knife clattering to the floor. Holmes turned to Vellucci, who stared at him with a mix of disbelief and relief. "Mr. Holmes," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "I knew you would come." "No time for pleasantries, Maestro," Holmes replied, swiftly cutting the ropes binding Vellucci's wrists. "Can you walk?" Vellucci nodded weakly, rubbing his wrists. "They've kept me here for days, threatening to kill me if I didn't reveal the location of the plates. I refused, could not let them use my circus for such villainy." Holmes's respect for the ringmaster grew. "A brave stand, but a dangerous one. We must move before the second guard returns." As if on cue, Scarface's voice rang out from the far end of the warehouse. "Jem, it's just some blasted pipes. Where are you?" Holmes pulled Vellucci behind a crate, his mind racing. Watson, having completed his diversion, rejoined them, his revolver at the ready. "We're outnumbered if more arrive," Watson whispered. "What now?" Holmes's eyes scanned the surroundings, landing on a stack of barrels marked with a chemical symbol. "Watson, those barrels likely flammable. If we can create a controlled distraction, we may escape through the tunnel entrance. Vellucci, can you lead us to the circus grounds?" Vellucci nodded, his strength returning. "The tunnel connects to the main tent. I can guide you." Holmes formulated a plan with lightning speed. "Watson, fire a single shot into those barrels, not to ignite them, but to create a leak. The smell will panic the guard and give us cover. Then we move for the tunnel." Watson hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. He aimed carefully and fired, the shot ringing out like a thunderclap. The bullet punctured one of the barrels, and a sharp, acrid odor filled the air as liquid began to seep onto the floor. Scarface shouted in alarm, his footsteps pounding toward the sound. "Now," Holmes hissed, leading Vellucci and Watson toward the tunnel entrance, concealed behind a pile of crates. They slipped inside just as Scarface reached the barrels, cursing loudly as he realized the danger. The tunnel was narrow and damp, its walls rough-hewn and slick with moisture. Holmes lit a small pocket lantern, its faint glow illuminating the path. Vellucci, though weakened, moved with determination, his knowledge of the circus's secret passages guiding them unerringly. Watson brought up the rear, his revolver still in hand, alert for pursuit. As they navigated the tunnel, Vellucci spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Mr. Holmes, this is no ordinary crime. The man behind it, he calls himself the Professor. He came to me months ago, offering wealth beyond imagining if I allowed the circus to transport his goods. When I discovered they were forged notes, I refused. That's when the threats began." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The Professor Moriarty, his schemes are like a spider's, were intricate, far-reaching, and deadly. He chose your circus for its mobility and anonymity, a perfect conduit for his counterfeit empire." Watson's voice was grim. "If more involved, this goes beyond Vellucci. He could destabilize the entire economy." "Precisely," Holmes said. "Which is why we must not only save Vellucci, but also secure evidence of this operation. The printing plates are the key. Vellucci, do you know their location?" Vellucci shook his head. "I hid them before they took me. There in the circus, concealed in the mirrored cabinet from my act. I knew they'd never find them there." Holmes's mind clicked into place. The mirrored cabinet, the same one with the chemical odor and scuff marks. Moriarty's men had searched it but overlooked the plates hidden in plain sight. "Clever," Holmes murmured. We must retrieve them before Moriarty's syndicate does. The tunnel opened into the familiar understage area of the circus's main tent. The air was heavy with the scent of sawdust and canvas, a stark contrast to the dank warehouse. Holmes extinguished his lantern, relying on the faint moonlight filtering through the tent's seams. The circus was quiet, its performers likely asleep or huddled in fear, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their feet. Holmes led the way to the stage, where the mirrored cabinet stood, its polished surfaces glinting faintly. He examined it with meticulous care, his fingers probing for hidden compartments. After a moment, he pressed a concealed panel, and a small drawer sprang open, revealing a set of intricately engraved metal plates. Holmes lifted them carefully, their weight heavy with the promise of Moriarty's downfall. "These are the plates," Vellucci confirmed, his voice trembling with relief. "With these, you can prove the syndicate's scheme." Holmes tucked the plates into his coat. "We are not out of danger yet. Moriarty's men will soon realize you've escaped, and they will come for these. We must prepare for their retaliation." As if summoned by his words, a shadow moved at the edge of the tent. Watson raised his revolver, but Holmes held up a hand. "Wait, we need information, not bloodshed. Let's draw them out." Holmes motioned for Vellucci to hide behind the cabinet while he and Watson took positions in the shadows. Moments later, two figures entered the tent: Scarface and another man, their faces taut with urgency. "He's gone," Scarface hissed. "The boss'll have our heads if we don't find him and those plates." Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. "You'll find neither, gentlemen. Lay down your weapons, and you may yet avoid the gallows." The men froze, caught off guard. Scarface raised his pistol, but Watson was faster, firing a warning shot that grazed the man's arm. The pistol clattered to the ground, and the second man raised his hands in surrender. Holmes approached, his demeanor calm but commanding. "Who is your employer? Speak, and I may speak for you at Scotland Yard." Scarface glared, clutching his wounded arm. "You think you've won, Holmes? The professor's got eyes everywhere. You'll never stop him." Holmes's smile was cold. "We shall see. For now, you will accompany us to the authorities. The game is not over, but this round is mine." With the guards subdued and Vellucci safe, Holmes and Watson escorted their captives out of the tent, the printing plates secure in Holmes's possession. The circus grounds, bathed in the pale light of dawn, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if the terror that had gripped it was finally loosening its hold. But Holmes knew better. Moriarty was still out there, his web unbroken. The rescue of Vellucci and the recovery of the plate were victories, but they were mere skirmishes in a larger war. As they made their way back to London, Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, plotting the next move in his eternal chess match with the Napoleon of crime.